Today we are going to see. What if Azazel had a second plan for the Winchesters? Part 2. So let's get started. Dean awoke to the sound of crunching in a sense th. At the bed was emptier than it should have been. Not Sammy but someone was missing. Certain needs made themselves known, so he carefully sat up. Creaking to his feet, he looked down the hallway of th. motorhome and saw his baby girl eating out of what looked like a bright pink ceramic bowl. One hand on the wall, he made his way towards her and saw Bobby further along in the living area of the RV, reading a newspaper. He lowered the paper and gave Dean an assessing look. Sleeping Beauty awakes, he remarked after a second. Looks like she's been awake for a couple of minutes at least, Dean said, glancing slyly at Bobby. He squatted with great care and rubbed her neck. How are you, sweetheart? Did you have a nice nap? Gag me with a spoon, Bobby said, but his tone was humorous, so Dean let it pass. Your brother went a little overboard on the doggy doodads. Impossible, Dean declared. With a final scratch, he raised himself back to his feet and, giving Bobby a slight grimace, he went into the bathroom. When he came out, Lucy was waiting for him. He walked over to the sofa and sat down, and she jumped up next to him. Hey, girl, did you hear your great-uncle Bobby say that Uncle Sammy had gotten you too much stuff? He doesn't understand, now, does he? She licked him on the nose, and Dean laughed. Great-uncle, Bobby demanded. Dean looked up at him innocently. Well, I call you my uncle. So that would make you her great-uncle, right? She's your daughter. She's my baby girl, Dean said, rubbing his face against the top of her head while she nuzzled his neck. In fact, Bobby, you have two great nieces. Two, I have two babies, now, Dean replied. Lucy and the Impala, the car that's older than you is your baby. Yeah, Dean said with a shrug. Why not? Bobby sighed. I guess I don't know. Quote, where are Dad and Sammy? The sudden realization that he didn't know where Sam was caused his heart to start beating a bit faster. Lucy nuzzled his hand anxiously. Are they together? He asked, his eyes on Bobby. Yeah, Bobby said reassuringly. They're talking inside. That tone of voice had begun to grate on him. They all used it, Dad, Bobby, Sammy, and it made him all too aware of how easily he could freak out. The worst thing, though, was that he wasn't sure they weren't right. His behavior at breakfast had certainly made that seem likely. He allowed his resentment and focused his attention on the dog while talking to Bobby. What are they talking about? Rainbows and unicorns, Bobby said, his tone heavy with sarcasm, and Dean blinked at him. What do you think, Dean? They're fighting again. Who the hell knows? Bobby said. If they're not talking about you, they're talking about Stanford or Sam's exuberance about dog toys. Toys, squeaky bones, squeaky steaks, lengths of rope with knots tied in each end, pointing out that we could buy rope for way less, then cut it and knot it ourselves didn't seem to make a difference to him. The stuff from the store was meant for dogs, and nothing less would do for your Lucy. See, Dean said, still gazing down at his dog. Sammy loves you, too. Just in time to save Bobby from diabetic coma. The door opened to admit Dad and Sam. Dad seemed more than usually serious, which was cause enough for alarm, but there were massively bad vibes coming off of Sammy. Dean looked up at them, his stomach going weightless for a moment. Lucy crawled partway onto his lap, and he started stroking her head automatically. What is it? Bobby stood up. One of you come with me, he said, and his voice didn't have its usual casual sound to it. Glancing back and forth between them, he seemed to come to a decision. Sam, I need some help. Sam started to protest, but when both Bobby and Dad gave him a look, he shut up and went. All of this was just adding to Dean's freak out. What's going on? He asked. Dad settled in the chair Bobby had vacated and sighed. Sorry about that, your brother is a little, he paused. Shaking his head. Anyway, did Bobby or I tell you that the FBI was releasing some of the details about the case to the press this weekend? Dean blinked at him. The newspapers. John nodded. And TV and radio. Bobby and I saw a report on CNN. Dean shook his head. No, did they say my name? No, they didn't. You were mentioned in the story, but only as an unnamed survivor. John cleared his throat. They did release the names of the other victims they've identified. Dean closed his eyes. Sammy's mood had spoken volumes of bad news. So, I take it there's way more of them than the 3 in Oklahoma City that I knew about. Dad didn't say anything for a moment, and Dean opened his eyes to see his father scrutinizing his own hands. They've found a total of 17 now, he said. It felt like a blow to the sternum. Lucy whined and nuzzled close, and Dean tried to let her comfort him. 17. He considered the number. Is that all they found? He asked, looking up to find his father staring at him with wide eyes. That made him think again. Actually, I suppose it's surprising they found that many. Azazel's a pretty old demon to be that clumsy. His father's expression didn't change. He looked almost dumbstruck. Dean leaned forward. Dad, are you okay? That made John shake himself. I should be asking you that, but Dean, you're taking this awfully calmly. Dean shrugged. I knew he was killing people, Dad, he said, and his father blinked at him. The impression I got was it was like 3 a week. His father's jaw dropped. Dean, you know how long you were with him. Do you realize how many men that would mean? I try not to think about how long it was, Dean said, focusing his attention on making the hair on Lucy's head smooth and neat. Of course, John said immediately. That's all right, son, I'm sorry. He reached out to stroke Dean's hair. I didn't mean. Dean hit his hand away. Don't you coddle me, he snapped. And his father stared at him in surprise. I'm not broken. I'm not coddling. I'm not going to break, Dean interrupted. You don't coddle people, so don't coddle me. Dad shook his head. I'm not coddling you, Dean, he said. His eyes boring into Dean's. He reached his hand towards Dean, but seemed to change direction at the last minute to pet Lucy. It's just sometimes when I look at you, I see a 4-year-old. Dean snorted. I was never 4. Oh, yes you were, Dad retorted. You told me that October that you were 4 3/4, and very proud of it you were. A straw. NGE's sense of realization washed over Dean, and he didn't quite know what to do with it right off. He'd never really thought about his father's memories of that time before the fire. His own memories were so fragmentary and confused. Once Dean was talking again, Dad hadn't wanted to talk about that time. Everything was about the present, the need to keep Sammy safe, the need to keep moving. He found himself smiling, and he felt somehow shy about it. Not sure what reaction to expect and ready to be rebuffed, he said, I guess I do remember cowboy wallpaper. His father's eyes softened. So do I. And dressing up like a cowboy for Halloween. John chuckled. So do I, he said again, and Dean had a sudden flash of his father in even less authentic cowboy duds, taking him from house to house for trick or treat. He combed his fingers through Lucy's hair and her tail wagged gently. I also remember being utterly convinced that I'd shot the neighbor's cat with my sheriff's 6-shooter. John's eyes widened. What? He exclaimed. It wasn't even a BB gun. Mom had to explain to me that Buttons was old, and they'd just had to have her put down, that it had nothing to do with me, or my little gun that just went bang bang. His father's perplexed look broadened into a smile. As I recall, it was more like click click. Dean shook his head firmly. Sheriff's guns do not go click click. They go bang bang. The chuckle returned. Trust me, dude, it was definitely click click. Dean laughed. Whatever, I remember it as bang bang, either way. The RV door opened and Sam walked in, followed by Bobby. Both of them stared at John and Dean like they didn't know what to think, then Bobby's lips compressed. Didn't you have something to tell your son? He demanded. I told him, John said as. Dean raised his eyebrows at the tetchy remark. And then he comforted me. Sam walked over and sat down next to Dean on the other side of Lucy. Dean, you know it's okay to freak out over something like this. He said in about his girliest voice yet. Dean leaned closer to him. Go right ahead, he said softly, and Sam stared at him in shock. Didn't you guys hear me tell Denson that there was enough blood for a remake of The Shining? I wasn't kidding. Sam didn't seem to know what to say, but after a moment of silence, Bobby said, okay, then. So, what did the news say about the ones they found? I mean, who are they? Just guys all between the ages of 18 and 28, Dad said with a grimace. I gather they've all been marked in some way. They mentioned something about ritual mutilation. And they're calling him, the occultist. I guess it beats his real name, Dean said. Or the name of the poor bastard he's inhabiting. That will get out soon enough, John replied. Quote, they've identified him because the demon hasn't been careful about fingerprints. Dean grimaced. At least they're all guys. Sam's expression grew troubled. The ones they've found are all guys, he said. No, they were all guys. Dean replied. I think demons are kind of chauvinistic. Dean, that's not really what that means, Sam said, and Dean squinted his eyes at him. He was pretty sure he had the right word. Male chauvinist pig right. Chauvinist really means being prejudiced in favor of your own group, a chauvinist demon would. Dean shook his head and waved his hand for Sammy to stop talking. Dude, Francis, I get it, and you know what I mean. He only killed guys. You know that for sure? His father asked. Dean shrugged. He didn't have anyone but me to talk to. And I didn't have anything to do but listen. He shuddered slightly. I know he killed one person they won't find because he wasn't a he, so the ritual would have been pointless. He wasn't a he, John repeated, sounding puzzled. A transsexual, Sam asked. I don't know, I just know she didn't count. Definitely living as a guy, from what Azazel said, but I don't know how far along in the process things had gotten. Blank, blank. Sam hadn't really considered that notion, what gender reassignment surgery would mean in terms of gender-specific ritual magic. He tilted his head consideringly. I wonder what makes the difference there? He asked, almost thinking aloud. His father was giving him an odd look. I mean, I know what the difference is legally, but I'm not sure about ritually. Dean raised his eyebrows. What, you mean like, girl parts turned inside out to make man parts might not count? That was a very Dean way to put it, but it was to the point. Maybe not, Sam replied. But then he remembered his brother's lifestyle and education. He gave Dean a startled look. Wait, how do you know about that? I watch daytime television, Dean returned, giving his geek brother a glare. Seriously, Sam stared at him with incredulity. He said it like it was obvious, like he thought Sam should have known. You do, sure, Dean said. It's not all crap. There's Oprah. Sam rolled his eyes. Okay, yeah, her book club is really good, but to actually watch the show, any of those shows, it's just. The book club is good. Dean repeated. Sammy, you are such a girl. You're the one who watches daytime television, Sam retorted. That stopped Dean for a moment, but then he shrugged. Yeah, well, there isn't much else to watch besides porn in crappy motel rooms, Sammy. And there's only so many times you can watch Casa Erotica too. Right, Dean, and how many times is that? Sam asked. Rather than even trying to answer the question, Dean turned to their father. So, when am I going to get a gun again? When you can fire one without falling flat on your ass, Bobby said, and Dean turned towards him in surprise. Sam was a bit startled that Bobby was answering a question that fell firmly into their father's purview. Bobby observed their reactions with a sardonic snort. And yeah, it was my decision. Your daddy wanted to hand you a shotgun straight out of the hospital. Dad, Sam exclaimed, appalled by the idea though not overly surprised. Actually, he was stunned that his father had allowed himself to be overruled by Bobby. John gave him a darkling glare, but didn't speak. You wait till I get my car back. Dean trailed off, and none of the rest of them knew where to look as they all realized that he was remembering that his car had been emptied out completely. Son of a bitch, he muttered. What did he do with all of it? I wonder if Castiel knows. Don't worry, Dean, John said. I'll get you a new gun as soon as you're able to use one. Dean still had a scowl on his face, but when their father spoke, it softened and he grinned. Just so long as it doesn't go click click. Both of them started laughing. What the hell is that about? Bobby demanded, giving Sam an irritable look. Sam shook his head. I have no clue. That just made Dean and Dad laugh louder. Sam gazed at them perplexedly for a moment, then grinned. It was good to see them laughing together. It was something he'd seen far too little of in his life. Dean woke deep in the night and lay for a while next to his brother, trying to recapture sleep. Sammy slumbered on, oblivious and drooling slightly. Dean wondered if he was catching a cold, because Sammy didn't usually drool. Lucy, too, was in the land of rabbits that ran forever and were way fun to chase. She twitched occasionally in her sleep. He lay back, staring up at the ceiling and contemplating the surprise of actually talking about life in Lawrence with his father. That thought led inevitably to the missing guns and other weapons, his clothes, everything that had been taken from the car. Azazel would have had no reason to keep any of it. He hardly needed guns, and he wouldn't have wanted the salt and holy water around. A sudden whim made him wonder. Castiel, he murmured. You there? I am here, he said, and Dean found himself looking at the underside of the angel's chin. I didn't expect you to come, he said. Castiel looked down. You called. Yeah, he glanced at Sammy. Can you make it so Sammy won't wake up? Castiel reached across him and touched Sammy's forehead with 2 fingers. He will not awaken till I leave. What about Dad and Bobby? Dean asked. Lucy stirred and looked up, whiffling softly when she saw Castiel. The angel's brow furrowed. You want me to disable all of them? He asked, his hand stroking down Lucy's back as he straightened up from putting Sammy to sleep. Dean grimaced. Well, no, we will whisper. Nodding, Dean shifted to a sitting position and pointed to the foot of the bed. Sit down. I have no need to sit. You're looming, Dean replied, and, looking mightily uncomfortable, Castiel settled down. Wow, you do look awkward. With a completely straight face, Castiel said, it is the wings. If it hadn't been for a certain twinkle in his blue eyes, Dean might have taken his words at face value. You could try. Scooting back and letting them dangle off the end of the bed, Dean suggested with a sly grin. Dean, why did you call me? Castiel asked. Lucy had shifted to sit between them, and Castiel stroked her head absently. Because I didn't think it would work, Dean said, embarrassed. Do you have any idea where my stuff is? Your stuff? The stuff Azazel took out of the Impala. Oh, I see, that stuff, Castiel said. And Dean waited for him to point out that none of it was important enough to merit the attention of an angel so he could apologize. Yes, I tracked it down during my search for you. Prepared for a gentle put-down, Dean just stared at him for a second, dumbfounded by the affirmative answer. Where is it? I can tell you where it was at the times that I found the individual pieces. They are scattered quite broadly. Oh, Dean shrugged. I really wanted my guns back. And my knives. Abruptly, Castiel was gone, and Dean wondered if he'd annoyed or offended the angel. Before he could worry too much about it, though, Castiel had returned. The angel placed the pearl-handled 1911 pistol on the bed beside Dean's legs. Lucy sniffed it curiously, not seeming Remo. Telly alarmed by the disappearing and reappearing angel. Dean picked the gun up and noticed that it was too light to be loaded. It had a pawn shop tag that said $250 on it. You got this out of a pawn shop? Yes. Dean found that slightly worrisome, but then a realization occurred to him. Of course, they had it illegally. Yes. Dean examined the gun minutely. Thank you, Saz. I didn't expect you to go out and get it for me, I mean. I appreciate it, don't get me wrong, but I would never have asked you to do it. It is my pleasure, Castiel said, and he really seemed to mean it. Dean gazed at him in utter befuddlement. Saz, why did you help me? Castiel's eyes met his for a moment of intense connection. You are my friend, he said, and then he was gone again, leaving Dean wondering how he'd come to have an angel for a friend, and when it had happened. Lucy nuzzled under his hand and he scratched her head while he thought. Dude, Dad came into the doorway to the bedroom. What are you doing? Dean held up the 1911 mutely and Dad came across the room to take it from his hands. He popped the mag out and checked the chamber to make sure it was empty. Where'd this come from? Castiel brought it for me. Castiel just showed up and brought you a gun? John asked, raising his eyebrows disbelievingly. Dean flushed. Not exactly. I didn't think he'd come, but I called him. And you asked him to go get you a gun? No, Dad, I just asked him if he knew where any of my stuff was. Turns out he tracked it all down when he was looking for me. I didn't ask him to get anything, I just asked if he knew. John pulled the price tag off the pistol and said, well, I'll give it back to you when you can shoot it without falling down. I could shoot it right now without falling down. Dean retorted in a heated whisper. Wah, Sammy murmured, stirring like he was about to sit up. Go back to sleep, Sam, Dad ordered, and Sam subsided. What do you mean, Dean? He asked softly. It's not loaded, it would just go click click. He saw the answering light in his father's eyes and grinned. Well, click click would be bad for this gun, so I'll just hold onto it for you. Go back to sleep, Dean. John left the room, and Dean lay back again, sure that he wasn't going to be able to manage it. Lucy wormed in between him and Sam and curled up against his back. Dean stared at the ceiling, his mind still miles from sleep. Then he felt something on his forehead that felt like two fingers pressing gently between his eyes. No fair, he muttered as he drifted back to sleep. Blank. The next morning, Sunday morning, they ate breakfast with Ellen and Joe again. Dean tried to stick it out a while, but he was still getting tired awfully easily. John was leery of sending him back to bed after the way he'd woken up in the middle of the previous night, but making him stay awake didn't seem to be an answer, either. He and Sammy went back to the RV. Lucy walking along beside Dean. She was visibly gaining weight, one definite plus as far as Dean's mood went. John avoided the bar. He didn't want to get trapped into talking to other hunters out there. But he made a few calls to pass on hunts he'd picked up on in his reading. He couldn't stop watching for them, even if he'd stopped taking them himself. Fortunately, thus far at any rate, He'd always found someone to pass them along to. A friend of Bobby's had dealt with the Wendigo John had theorized was operating in Blackwater Ridge, and Travis had worked the airplane job. That had sounded like a strange one. But John didn't have any details of its resolution, just that it had been resolved before the last potential victim had died. It was strange, passing hunts on to other people. Still, Dean was the most important thing right now, and Dean needed him. Even with Bobby and Sammy here, Dean needed him too. He kept up his research, looking for signs of other children like Sammy, widening it to account for possible paranormal talents. It just added another facet to his search. Ellen cleared off the desk in the TV room to give him someplace to work and watched over his shoulder for a while before going back downstairs to tend bar and dispense wisdom to hunters. Sam went out and picked up Chinese food for them that night and they ate in the RV. Dean was pretty quiet, but nothing out of the ordinary for him lately. John spent a restless night once they'd all gone to bed. He kept waking and going to check on the boys. The only one who was ever awake when he went in, though, was Lucy. She seemed to be watching Dean, and, curious, he watched for a while as well. After about 10 minutes of just standing there, John saw Dean start to twitch and his face took on a pained, anxious expression. He started forward, but Lucy nuzzled Dean's face and licked his cheek, and Dean calmed. The dog looked at him then and he could swear she was asking if he was satisfied. Nonplussed and still very tired, John went back to bed. Blank. Sam woke to a bouncing mattress as Dean, heedless of his sleeping brother, played with Lucy on the bed. "Who's my good girl? Who's my good girl?" Dean chanted, pulling on one end of the rope toy while Lucy held onto the other for dear life. Lucy put a foot in the center of Sam's bladder and Sam rolled out of bed in a hurry. "Good morning," Dean called cheerily. Sam gave him a harried look and hurried into the bathroom. As he washed his hands, he contemplated the fact that they were probably going to have to take this thing somewhere to get it pumped out soon. He made a mental note to ask Bobby about it later. When he emerged from the bathroom, there was nowhere for him to even sit on the bed. Dean and the dog had taken over the entire mattress with their tussle. "Dean, are you sure you should be rolling around like that? What if something opens up?" "I feel great, Sammy," Dean said. "Better than I have in a long time." Sam gazed at him anxiously. "That's wonderful, Dean, but you don't want to overextend yourself." Dean gave him a glower. "I'm fine, Sammy. Is it time for breakfast yet?" "I don't know. I've been up for less time than you have. You boys are making enough of a racket for three," Bobby groused from the front of the RV. "It's a little past 7. Go on inside if you think you'll be welcome." "I know, Sammy. Why don't you take me out for breakfast? You must have seen a diner when you went out looking for dog food and stuff." "I somehow doubt we can take Lucy into a diner," Sam pointed out, and Dean slumped. "Does anyone want to know what I think?" Dad said from the floor. "Sure, I think the boys should go outside to play." Dean's eyes widened. "Okay." He was out the door with Lucy in about 20 seconds. "Dad," Sam exclaimed, "it's cold out there." "Then put on some clothes and get out there," Dad ordered. Sam scrambled into something that probably looked hilarious and followed Dean out. Before he'd taken 2 steps away from the RV, a snowball hit him in the side of the face. Outraged, he looked around and saw the next one coming. Dodging, he ran to one of the drifts by the edge of the parking lot. Slipping a little on the ice as he went, a snowball pegged him on the ass, and then it was on. They ran around like kids, Lucy scampering back and forth between them, till Dean sagged to the ground. Breathing big, icy gouts of air, Sam hurried across to him, worried, but before he could express that worry, the back door of the bar opened. "Anyone want hot chocolate?" Ellen called, and Sam paused only long enough to help Dean up. They both came panting into the kitchen of the bar and Ellen led them upstairs where there was hot chocolate and pancakes and sausage. Blank. After his early morning activities, John expected Dean to collapse well before noon, but he hung in there, sitting in Ellen's living room playing checkers with his brother until after 1. Then he and Sammy went back to the RV. Bobby and John were working upstairs, Bobby reading through John's notes to see if there was anything he'd missed. Ellen came up and said, "Bobby, seems like there's a package for you." "It came," Bobby said, looking up, sounding pleased. "No, actually, it didn't. Evidently the post office doesn't want to deliver it because your name isn't on our hell." "I don't know. Anyway, they put this in the box." She handed him a slip of paper. "I guess you take it to the post office and they'll give you your package." "Balls," Bobby muttered. "You need anything from town while I'm there?" I've got a list, she said with a smile, handing him that, too. Take Joe. Bobby took it, snorting. You need anything, John? Newspapers, John said, digging the keys to the truck out of his pocket. If there's a newsstand, I'd like any of the regional dailies you can find. Got it. Catch you all later. Ellen went back downstairs and John kept working. After a while, though, he felt the need for some coffee. He got up and went down into the kitchen, where he found Ellen preparing for the evening's custom. He poured himself a cup of coffee and started doctoring it. You know, John, Ellen said from behind him. We're going to have to talk about it sooner or later. Talk about what? John asked uncertainly, turning around. This business between us needs settled. And now's as good a time as any. The boys are out of range, Bobby's off with Joe. It's just you and me and the bar's closed. John shook his head. Ellen, I don't know what you're talking about, he said, hoping she'd let it drop. Given the way she'd set things up, though, he somehow doubted it. I'm pissed at you for letting Bill die, Ellen announced, and John flinched, looking away. Not nearly as pissed as you are at yourself, though. John didn't look up, but that wasn't where he'd expected her to go. But both of us are irrational for blaming you for something you couldn't possibly predict. Swallowing a lump in his throat, John looked up. It was my fault, Ellen. I made a mistake, a rookie's mistake. You were a rookie, John, she pointed out with a certain wry humor. Not the juggernaut you're widely believed to be now. John gave her a dubious look. Juggernaut, he repeated. Don't you know what your reputation is among other hunters? Shrugging, John said, Pamela described me as brooding and paranoid. Ellen snickered. Yeah, I guess that's part of it, but you are thought to be unstoppable, unkillable and exceptionally knowledgeable. John snorted. But Ellen leaned forward. John, most hunters are specialized. Gordon Walker and Daniel Elkins hunt vampires, Jason Quigley hunts ghouls and zombies, Matthew Forrester hunts werewolves. Almost no one goes after everything. At least no one who lives to tell about it. I'm nothing special, Ellen, and I don't believe people talk about me like that. Ask Bobby, she said. Besides, that's not the point. You didn't go out and get Bill killed out of pride or because you were pulling some grandiose stunt, but I've never really been able to deal with my feelings on the subject because you up and disappeared. Taking those boys of yours with you. John stared at her. Ellen, I think that's what makes me the angriest, John. You delivered his body, you stuck around long enough to see him buried. And then you vamoosed and I never heard from you again. Not till Dean went missing. I figured seeing me would just bring it all back, that you wouldn't want me around. Ellen shook her head sharply. You felt guilty and you didn't want to face me or Joe. John turned right around and took a long swallow of coffee. Don't think I didn't notice how you avoided Joe on your last trip back. Or how you've been trying to avoid her now. He heard her moving closer, then he felt her hand on his back. We could have helped each other, John. I couldn't have helped anyone. It's only been in the last 3 months that I could think of Mary, talk about Mary, without falling apart. Ellen was silent for a moment, then she pulled on his shoulder to get him to turn around. I knew you couldn't bear to have her mentioned back then, but when you talked about it the other night, I figured are you saying you never talked to those boys about their mama? He sensed a measure of disapproval in her tone, and he shrugged helplessly. What good would it have done them for me to talk to them about their mother if doing it made me hysterical? Blank, blank. Ellen stared at him, stunned by this insight. Not a lot, she said after a moment. John grimaced and turned his head away. Look, I know you lost Bill, John said, and I know it's the same thing. Listening to him, Ellen had begun to wonder if it was remotely the same thing. She'd loved Bill, and she missed him something awful, but she'd moved on. John met her eyes with a searing intensity. It's like it was yesterday, Ellen. And it hurts the same every time I think of it. Have you ever had another relationship? Ellen asked gently. John let out a deep sigh. Yes, once. I thought Sammy needed a mom and Dean needed a break. And I liked her. She seemed. He shook his head, his expression shuddered. She turned out to be a demon, and she actually tried to take Sammy away. My God, Ellen murmured, appalled. After that, I didn't let anyone near the boys, not long-term like that. I didn't dare, and it meant he didn't dare take comfort for himself. So, have you never, since then, had any? John flushed. I didn't say there've been a few, nothing that lasted more than a few days. His eyes widened. Ellen waited, but he didn't say anything. John, is something wrong? We were saying no secrets, right? He gave her a worried, anxious look. We were, Castiel was, at any rate. She grabbed him by the shoulder and led him out to a table in the bar. Okay, John, what is it? John looked down at his coffee cup, then glanced over towards the RV. The boys can't know what I'm about to tell you. No secrets, she asked. This is different, but someone should know in case something comes up when I'm not around. John, what is it? I have another son. Ellen's jaw dropped. Back in 1990, I got myself hurt bad on a hunt. Almost died. Ellen nodded. He nurse who patched me up. I told her what was going on, she understood, and the local sheriff actually helped me hunt the sucker down and kill him when I was better. That's unusual, John shrugged. Well, we kind of anyway. She never called me, she never told me, but about 2.5 years ago the boy himself called. So he's, what, 14? 15, John replied. Have you met him? Yeah, John said. Are the two of you close? Ellen asked. John shook his head. He's a good kid, but he's basically a stranger, and I don't have a lot to give him. I can't even be the weekend dad that most guys would be in this kind of situation. I've done a few things with him, but he doesn't know anything about hunting, and I'd just as soon it stayed that way. I can understand that. Ellen pursed her lips. But his mama knows. John nodded. Does either of them know about your boys? Kate knows. Adam doesn't. She agrees that in the circumstances, that's best. Because of the hunting. If you could keep Joe out of the life, wouldn't you? I've tried and failed, but I take your meaning. Ellen sighed. You're going to have to tell Bobby, and Castiel if he doesn't know already. John nodded, looking dismayed and resigned. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, and then John cleared his throat. I am sorry. About Bill, I mean. More sorry about Joe growing up without him. I know, she said, putting her hand on his. After a moment, he got up and left, and she figured he'd had as much emotional talk as he could take. She got up and got back to work. John really Deanji seemed to realize that he was an exceptional hunter. One thing she'd accepted long ago was that if it hadn't been that hunt that had done Bill in, it would have been another one. Her husband had been a reasonably good hunter. But few hunters who went out in the field regularly lived more than 10 years after they got started. By that standard, Bill had already been living on borrowed time when he died. Shaking her head, she turned her thoughts to more positive subjects. Jerry Panowski shook his head in appalled astonishment at the news. A serial killer called the occultist who'd attacked one of the Winchester boys. He had a powerful suspicion that this fellow wasn't just a serial killer. Maybe not even a human. It impelled him to make a phone call, however. Hello, John, hi, it's Jerry Panowski. I wanted to call and thank you for sending your friend to help with my problem. That Travis guy is kind of rough around the edges, but he got the job done. The airplane is safe now, and so are the remaining crew and passengers. Quote, oh, I'm glad. I'd wondered why you didn't come yourself, but now that I've seen this stuff on the news, I completely understand. Thanks for even thinking out me while you were going through such a terrible time. Just what did you see on the news? John asked, sounding startled. Well, that serial killer down south. They just said on the news that the single survivor that was found is Dean Winchester. That is your Dean, isn't it? There was a brief silence, then John said, I didn't know they'd released his name yet. Jerry grimaced. I'm sorry. If it's any help, it didn't sound like it was an official release. They talked about sources. They don't talk that way when it's a direct release from law enforcement. How is Dean? He's okay, thanks, Jerry, John said. Look, I've got another call coming in. Can I? Of course, I just wanted to thank you. Tell Dean I wish him all the best. I will. Blank. Jim Murphy was putting together ideas for his Christmas Day sermon. Christmas didn't fall on a Sunday very often, and that made it feel very important to get the message right. He had the news on, hoping that some story would come up that might give him a good anecdote to build his sermon around. He sat back to listen to a segment on food closets, but it was far too general a story. A couple of profiles might have been helpful. He turned back to his page of notes on charity and giving. The next story started, this one about the latest serial killer to come to light. Not Christmas morning fare, at least not at his church. After a moment, though, he heard something, a name, that made him look up. Dean Winchester. They were wrapping up the story, though, and he didn't know what they'd said about him. He'd known Dean was missing for some weeks, but he hadn't heard any news, and this sounded like the worst of all possible bad news. He pulled out his phone and paused briefly, trying to decide whether he should call John or someone else. Shaking his head, he dialed John's number. "Hello," John said gruffly. "John, it's Jim Murphy," Jim said. "Have you heard anything about Dean?" "Shit, Jim, I forgot to call you," John said. He didn't sound devastated, but Jim knew John well enough to know that he was capable of putting on masks to fool even himself. "And Dean is sitting upstairs, watching some TV show on Sammy's computer." "Sam," Jim repeated. "Sam's with you. He helped me find Dean," John replied. "John, I just saw something on the news connecting Dean to a serial killer." "What's going on?" "The occultist," John said, and though he'd heard the media nickname before, now it hit Jim between the eyes. "So, not a serial killer," Jim said slowly. "We really shouldn't be talking about this on the phone, Jim," John said, and Jim was reminded of his friend's paranoia. Heaven knows what or who might be listening in. "Where are you?" "The Roadhouse," John replied. "I'll be there as soon as I can get there." "Dean's okay, though. He's getting better all the time," John said, and that answer made Jim even more anxious. He hung up, grabbed a few of his things and hurried out to his car. Paranoia. Maybe John had been right all these years. It wasn't paranoia if things were actually after you. Blank, underscore, blank. Jeremy Southers found this OC cultist guy fascinating and terrifying at the same time. He didn't fall into the guy's age range, if the cops were right about that, which made him feel a little less nervous, but he spent a lot of me driving through the Midwestern states. For all he knew he'd met the guy. How people like that operated made him intensely curious. So, when the news came on in a bar in Nashville, he asked the bartender to turn it up. "Did you hear they found a survivor?" the bartender asked. Jeremy nodded. "I can't imagine what it must be like to survive something like that. It's not like war, where most of the violence is pretty impersonal. But to come out of," he broke off. "What did they just say?" "They've identified the survivor," said a guy closer to the TV. "Dean Winchester." Jeremy focused his attention on the news again. Early September in Nebraska, and then he was found more than 2 months later near Birmingham, Al. So far as anyone can tell, he is the first victim to be abducted, which has led to wild speculation. Jeremy gulped. He'd run into a guy named Dean Winchester in Lincoln, Nebraska, during the first week in September. They'd spent a perfectly awesome night together, and Jeremy had gone his way and Winchester had gone his. If that was him, Jeremy pulled his phone off his belt and scrolled through till he'd found the number. Winch. He pressed send and lifted the phone to his ear. He got a message telling him the phone was no longer in service. Birmingham. Not more than a 3-hour drive. He could be there before midnight. Blank, underscore, blank. Lisa Braden finally got Ben to play quietly in his room and went out into the living room to collapse on the sofa. She'd thought teaching yoga was energy intensive. A full day of classes had nothing on wrangling a bunch of first graders during the dress rehearsal for their school Christmas pageant. She flipped the TV on and stared at the screen for several moments before her brain got back in gear. It was on CNN from this morning before work. Words started percolating into her mind before she was paying full attention. Abruptly, a name caught her attention, and she ran the live television back a few seconds. The anchor was looking solemnly into the camera. Lisa had caught her in mid-sentence, but she was far enough back to get the information she wanted. "And we can tell you exclusive, Ely, that the sole surviving victim is Dean Winchester, a drifter who was abducted in the small town of Beatrice, Nebraska in early September. He was not found by the police, nor by the FBI, who are now investigating the case. But instead his family tracked him down to an abandoned Shriners Hall outside Birmingham, Alabama." Lisa sat forward and looked intently at the burned-out building that was shown on screen, wondering if this could possibly be the same Dean Winchester she'd met in 1998. He'd been a drifter, or she wouldn't have hooked up with him, and he'd talked a little bit about his family. They didn't show a photo, though, which made it difficult to be sure. Not that it mattered. If it was him, the last thing he needed right now was for a random girl he'd known for 2 days 7 years ago to show up and expect his attention. She flipped channels to find something watchable and stopped on Law and Order. Even when they lost the case, it was more cheerful than the news. Blank, underscore, blank. Grace snapped off the radio. "Hell, I was hoping they'd manage to keep his name dark a little longer than this. Why do people think that victims of crimes ought to be outed to the whole world?" Retta asked. "Damn it, they'd left Oklahoma City just after the arrest late in the morning. Ham had offered to take care of Grace's paperwork, and Retta's was already done. Grace still thought that made her an overachiever. Where's the next turn? Have we gone 164 miles yet? More like 148. Well, we'll be taking something called Center Road. US 81 North once we hit that 164 miles. That's the last really long stretch, isn't it? It is. Shouldn't be more than 2.5, 3 hours till we get there now. Good. I gotta pee. Grace. Blank, underscore, blank. Dean lay at full length on the sofa in Ellen's living room upstairs from the bar. Lucy had stretched herself out along his body, her chin on his chest. He had his left hand on the sofa beside him, and his right hand rested on her back, stroking through her soft fur from time to time. Sam's laptop lay on the coffee table, and Dean was finally trying to catch up on Dr. Sexy. The show was having trouble holding his attention, though. His mind kept whirling from subject to subject. He wanted to know where Azazel was now. After all, the demon had put months into holding him and marking him, and he wasn't done. It seemed unlikely that he'd just given in tamely. Dean checked his pocket for the pistol he'd slip pet into it to guarantee escape if Azazel showed up and got past everyone else. Bobby was still off in town with Joe, Dad was downstairs doing something that involved a hammer and nails for Ellen, and Sam was in the RV having some alone time. He was by himself with no other people in the room, something that hadn't been allowed for ages. He thought the dog was a big piece of that, though, and if he didn't have any other reason to be grateful to her, he would be grateful for that. And when Sammy went back to school, he'd have her to comfort him. That would be a good thing. He noticed suddenly that the screen on Sam's laptop had gone still on the last credits for the episode, and he had no recollection about what had happened. He reached down and grabbed the back scratcher he'd snagged from Ellen's desk. Using it, he reached out and shut the computer, then pulled the TV remote into reach. Maybe something on TV would catch his attention more firmly. The screen popped on with a hum, then a pretty face filled the screen. "Blizzard," she said, and clearly it was the end of a sentence. The angle of the camera changed, and she turned to face it. In other news, 3 more bodies have been found in Paris, Kentucky. Video footage took her place then with a caption that read "Occultist dump site." Police could be seen, as well as emergency workers, but the view was from too great a distance to see what they were working on. As more news has reached us, a question arises. If the police in Beatrice had not ignored a missing persons report in November, would those young men have died? Dean's attention was abruptly riveted by the town name. A car belonging to a drifter named Dean Winchester was impounded in Beatrice, Nebraska on September 9 of this year. On November 8, he was reported missing there by his father, John, but the police in Beatrice refused to investigate, claiming insufficient evidence existed that a crime had been committed. Within a week, Dean Winchester was rescued from the serial killer who has come to be called the occultist by his father and brother, who apparently took the investigation into their own hands when the police would not take action. Bernard Wilson, the police chief in Beatrice, refused to be interviewed for this story. The FBI have initiated a nationwide manhunt to catch the occultist, so named for the strange symbols he carves into the skin of his victims. There was more, but Dean didn't hear it. Barking from upstairs made John stop in the middle of transferring Dean's bedding from Ellen's washer to her dryer. Lucy had been an abnormally well-behaved dog thus far, so he didn't know whether to think she was finally showing a bit of bad behavior, or if there was something wrong. He took off up the stairs, and the minute he got in sight, she stopped barking and withdrew into the living room where they'd left Dean. John found that not at all reassuring. He hurried after her and found her next to Dean, who was huddled in a corner, hands over his face. Whimpering and cringing, Lucy gave a soft whine as she looked imploringly up at him. John nodded at her, just like she had any idea what that head movement meant, and squatted down next to his son. "Dean," he said, not touching him immediately. "Dude, you hear me?" There was no apparent effect, so John reached out and put his hand on Dean's shoulder. Before he could do more than draw breath to speak, his son reacted violently, shoving him backwards and taking off towards the door. John had thoughtfully closed it behind him, and Dean scrabbled frantically at it. "Dean," John shouted, hoping against hope that volume would help get through to him. "Dean Michael Winchester," he barked. Dean whirled and put his back up against the door, his eyes wide and still full of panic. He looked at John and seemed to recognize him, but he was still breathing hard, still filled with tension, frozen in place apart from the heaving of his chest. "Dean, it's Dad," John said, and Dean just stared at him. John took a tentative step forward. "Dean, He broke off, realizing that Dean's gray t-shirt was developing a new pattern. "You're bleeding," he said. Dean looked down and saw the blood marking his shirt. John took another step forward. "Hold still, son, I need to." Dean's hands came up to ward him off. "No, no," he begged. "I don't need treatment. Please, no, it will stop on its own. Dean, I'm not going to hurt you." "No." Dean cringed away from him. "I don't need treatment. I'll get better, I promise." John hated having to force him, but in actuality, Dean didn't put up much of a fight. It hurt John's heart how easy it turned out to be to get Dean to let him look him over. Trembling like a frightened horse, Dean stood still while John pulled his shirt up and off over his head. The bandages were bloody in front and on the left side, but Dean's back and right side seemed to be clear. "Sam is going to kill me," he muttered and sat Dean down in a chair. Lucy walked over and leaned against Dean's legs, trying to comfort him. Grimacing, John started undoing his younger son's careful work. Peeling tape off the fragile skin made John extremely nervous. But there were one or two of the spots under the tape that had split, so he really didn't have a choice. "Hold still," he murmured, but he needn't have bothered. Despite the way he was shaking, Dean didn't move an inch. John managed to pull the tape off, sponge up the blood, and he used butterfly bandages to hold the cuts closed before reapplying gauze over the top. He'd thought Sam was over acting when he'd made sure to leave a kid in the room with Dean, but apparently it was necessary. When he was done, John held out a fresh shirt and Dean gazed at him perplexedly. "Put it on, son," John said. "Dad," Dean murmured in a tone of discovery, and John realized that whatever he'd said earlier, whatever Dean had recognized earlier, it had borne little connection to reality. "Yeah, dude, it's me," John said, putting his hands on Dean's shoulders. Abruptly, Dean slammed into him, and John wrapped his arms around his son. Dean began to weep noiselessly into John's chest. John only knew he was crying from the spasmodic jerkiness of his breathing and the damp patches on his shirt. "It's okay, Dean, you're safe. You're with me, and you're safe." Lucy leaned in against Dean, and John thanked God that she'd come. He couldn't begin to guess how long Dean would have squatted in this room, bleeding and terrified, if Lucy hadn't been there. Blank. Dean felt utterly humiliated. He'd freaked out at a stupid news story. His dog had had to call his dad to come get him out of it. He'd managed to break open his damned wounds, and now Sam felt like he had to double-check their father's work. "I've bound wounds up before, Sam," John said. "I know, Dad," Sam replied. "But it's just." "I know." Dean had been expecting an explosion from his father. Not agreement and a sympathetic hand on Sam's shoulder. Sam peeled back a patch of gauze and nodded. "Dean, you okay?" "I'm a little cold," he said, and was gratified that Sam quickly taped the bandage back down and let him lower his shirt. Turning his back on his father and brother, he sat down on the sofa and patted the seat next to him to call Lucy up. "Why don't you guys go away? Me and Lucy got stuff to talk about." Behind him, he heard Sammy ask, "Do you think we dare?" He probably thought he was being quiet, but they weren't more than 5 feet away, and Dean had always had good ears. "It will be fine, Sam," John said. "Come on, Dean, we'll call you when it's time for dinner." Dean waved a hand and otherwise ignored them till the door closed. Dean reached down and started stroking Lucy's head. "It's a good thing I have you, sweetheart," he murmured, and she snuggled closer. "Because no other woman is ever going to look at me twice again." Memories swam forward in his mind, not as he might have expected. Memories of Grace, who he'd just talked to, but memories of the bendiest weekend of his life. He wondered what his father would think of Lisa Braden. He'd never been overly judgmental about Dean's sexual escapades, but what would Dad think if he knew that Dean still had dreams that featured Lisa, and not just sexual dreams? They'd spent a whole weekend together, and even two young, fit people couldn't keep going for a full 72 hours, no matter how much caffeine they drank. They'd talked a fair amount, about her family, about his. He knew she had 5 brothers and 2 sisters and that she came from a devout Catholic family, though that was no surprise. With 8 children they almost had to be either Catholic or Mormon. He'd had dozens of casual encounters, but very few of the women came back to his mind without external summoning, and of those, he'd only ever been serious about one, and that was Cassie Robinson. Café au lait skin, big, dark eyes and a sweet smile. He'd come close to loving her, but everything they'd had together had been lost for him when she'd accused him of making his life story up out of whole cloth as an excuse to dump her. See, Cassie had reminded him in odd ways of Sammy, a crusading spirit, blazing intelligence, and the tiniest bit self-focused. Of all the women he'd been with, there were two he dreamed about with any frequency, Lisa and Cassie. Lisa had been smart and sassy, and she'd had a zest and verve to her that made her enormously fun. Cassie had been intense and serious, which had its own appeal. Still, when he'd dreamed of Lisa, he woke up feeling cheerful and ready for the day, and a little frisky. When he'd dreamed of Cassie, he woke up irritable and dissatisfied. Fortunately, he rarely dreamed of Cassie, but a month rarely went by when he didn't have a dream about Lisa. What that meant, he really didn't know, but it hardly mattered now. No woman was going to want to have sex with him once she'd seen he mess of scars and burns his skin had become. And somehow, having sex with his t-shirt on didn't appeal. The door opened behind him and Sammy walked in. "I got away from Dad," Sam said, walking around the sofa and kneeling down by the coffee table. "You want me to start up Dr. Sexy again? It wasn't that made you." Dean raised a hand. "No, Sammy, I couldn't concentrate on it, so I turned on the TV." Sam glanced over at the TV. A crease between his brows. "What happened, then? Does it matter?" Dean asked, giving him a long-suffering look. "I don't want to talk about it. Dean, I want to make sure I can keep it from happening." "Sammy, leave it," Dean said. "I don't want to talk about it and I'm not going to." "Look, Dean, we need to know what causes your..." Dean stood up abruptly. "I'm going downstairs." He whistled. "Come on, Lucy," he said, and the dog jumped down from the sofa, her claws clicking against the hardwood floor. "Dean, the bar's full at this hour." "I don't care," Dean said, and he left the room. Blank. I didn't think Bobby Singer ever left his lair except for a quick hunt and back home again. "It happens from time to time," Ellen told Dwight as she topped off his glass. The crowd was shaping up to be huge for a Monday night. "I take it the hunt went okay." "Well, I've still got all my fingers," Dwight said, laughing. "Can't be all bad." He glanced around. "I see a few new faces. Who are the kids?" Ellen looked over at Sam in the corner and Dean, who was playing darts with an intensity that was starting to draw attention. Or maybe it was the skill. He just kept throwing darts, over and over again, always landing them in the bullseye. "Sam and Dean Winchester," she said. "Their daddy's around here somewhere, too. Hell, I never thought I'd ever see a Winchester. Thought they didn't mingle with us riff-raff." Dwight elbowed his neighbor, a man whose name Ellen didn't know. He just rolled his eyes. Dwight had been hunting for about 2 years. He wasn't wet behind the ears by any stretch of the imagination, but he was young enough and new enough to still have more enthusiasm than most. For such a weedy guy, he can throw a mean dart. "He ain't weedy," said the man Ellen didn't know. "He looks awful skinny to me," Dwight said. "He's not weedy," the man repeated. "He's sick." "What's he got?" Dwight asked. "Really good hearing and a bad case of the screw-use," Dean called from 20 feet away. He threw a final dart and then walked across to pull the lot of them out. Ellen controlled a grin. Dwight's neighbor snorted. "Dumbass," he muttered, then glanced at her. "I haven't seen hide nor hair of John Winchester in 10 years. How's he doing?" Ellen shrugged, not inclined to do John's answering for him. Especially not to a man she didn't know. "He's around here somewheres. You can ask him." The man nodded and seemed to lose interest. Ellen kept up with the customers. It wasn't too terribly busy this early in the evening. But hunters were like anyone else. They liked to wet their whistle at all times of the day, and some of them were apt to drown themselves in alcohol. Dean drew a crowd as the afternoon wore on into evening. Though, the betting got pretty heated as dart after dart went straight for the black. Dean turned around and glanced at the fella keeping the bets and grinned. Quote, "You boys do realize that I get a cut of this, right?" They all laughed and Dean kept throwing for another 10 or 15 minutes. She saw Sam watching his brother while pretending to work on his computer. The pretense had gotten thinner as the time went by, but he hadn't quite gotten to the point of going over and intervening when Dean stopped. "Okay, I've had enough. Come on, just one more round," suggested Louie. "A hunter from New York." "Pay up," Jack retorted. He stopped. "You lose." Dean shook his head, and she could see he was amused by the betting and by the subject of the betting. He crossed over to the door to the upstairs and then paused. "Hey, Sammy," he called, and everyone stopped to look at him. "I think I'll take a nap," he announced, and Sam gave him an exasperated look. He revealed one more dart that she hadn't even seen him take with him. He threw the one last dart from all the way across the room, and left before it even hit the target. Dead in the black, just like all the others. Ellen laughed. Within minutes, Sam had packed up his laptop and was disappearing upstairs. What are they, married? Asked a dry voice behind her, and she pegged the speaker as an elderly hunter named Whittier. Hell, if your brother looked like that, wouldn't you worry about him? Replied Marvin. He was another old hunter. Both of them had quit and just hung around Harvell's about 3 days out of every week. Offering advice to the young guys. If my brother looked like that, I'd bury him, Whittier shot back, and both of them laughed. Ellen rolled her eyes and kept working. Hunters could be as stupid or as funny as the rest of the world, they just tended to do whatever they did on fast forward. Not many of them made it to Whittier's age. At 60, with half his left leg amputated and only one eye. He was an example of what could happen if you were lucky. John came down around 7 and she saw the man she didn't know catch him. They went to a table and talked for a good hour. Seeing as John didn't seem irritated by the intrusion, she pegged the guy as provisionally okay. He and John finished their conversation and the man went on his way. John walked over to Howard's where Bobby was holding court with some of his cronies. Then she heard a voice from the bar call out, "Hey, Winchester, you the guy on the news, the one whose boy got grabbed by the serial killer?" John turned and scanned the bar. She couldn't be sure which guy had spoken, but he narrowed in on Adalberto Costi, known as Bertie to his friends and Adalberti to those who didn't like him so much. Ellen considered him to be a dabbler. He had reason to hunt, he had a brother who'd died bloody, but he didn't really have the guts to go out there and do what it took to get the job done. He hung out where there were hunters and tried to get someone to take him along. Since at least 2 of the fellows who'd shepherded him hadn't come back, he tended to get given a wide berth by the experienced guys. Newbies sometimes got suckered in, though. John's eyes were cold as agates, gazing at him. "Yeah, that's me," he said, his voice smooth and menacing. Ellen cast her mind back. Adel D hadn't been there when Dean had been downstairs. She wondered if he'd heard, though. So where is he, your boy? And how come he lived when all the others died? John shrugged. "My boy is upstairs," he said. And he lived because he wasn't one of the lucky ones. Silence filled the room at that statement as the gathered hunters absorbed John's words. Bobby grimaced but didn't disagree. She didn't know that she did either. She'd seen the photos that Sam had downloaded from the police and FBI. "Is it a hunt, John?" asked Corbett Evans. He'd been hunting about 3 years, and looked to be likely to last a while. "It's my hunt," John replied shortly. "Bobby, Sam's upstairs with something we should get a look at." John glanced around and then turned his back on the company. Leaning over the bar, he spoke in a voice meant for her only. "Ellen, would you make a list of guys you know and trust? I still get calls, and I'm running out of folks to pass them on to." "Sure, John," she said just as quietly, a little startled. John and Bobby left the room, and a hubbub rose. Ellen could tell that a lot of the conversations were about Dean and John, and she had a feeling that she owed her full hoe. Used to word of mouth and the presence of the Winchesters in Elgin. She overheard Joe telling one of the patrons that she didn't know anything about John's hunt and sweetly changing the subject. By 10, the bar was full up, and she had to hope the fire marshal didn't pick tonight for a spot inspection. She kept her eye on the crowd, not sure what to expect. Hunters were as dumb as anybody, and not everyone who'd shown up tonight got on well together. Joe managed to head off a couple of fights, and Ellen diffused at least one more, but at 10:30, belligerence turned to bellicosity over by the pool table. Ellen was grateful at least that it was over there and not by the tables. She didn't need to buy any more chairs this month. They knocked into a woman who'd been watching a match, spilling her beer. The woman shoved them back and yelled something about this being why God invented parking lots. When that didn't stop them, Ellen decided she'd had enough. She pulled her super soaker out from under the bar and filled it from her refrigerated tap. Then she leveled it and let the combatants have it. Her aim wasn't nearly so good as Dean's, but it was more than adequate to the task. After a second they broke apart. "Enough, boys. Head on out, both of you." When both guys looked like they were going to argue, their friends hustled them out. It thinned the crowd a little, but she didn't mind that so much. She put the super soaker under the bar again and went back to making drinks. When she turned back towards the pool tables, she found the woman with the spilled beer standing at the bar. She was a blonde with feathers clipped into her hair and a winning smile. Ellen grinned back at her. "Hey, honey, let me get you a fresh beer," she said, drawing a glassful and delivering it to her. Anything else I can do for you? Quote, I don't know, she drawled. Do you know anything about angels? Ellen felt her eyes widen at the sarcastic answer. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned closer and spoke very quietly. I'm guessing you do, at that. I'm here to see Dean Winchester. Ellen raised her eyebrows. Wait right here, she said. The woman shrugged, and Ellen went into the kitchen. Sam was there, grabbing some snacks for upstairs. Sam, get your father for me, would you? Sure, is something wrong? I don't think so. Sam nodded and hurried back upstairs. A moment later John came down. What is it? He asked. There's a woman out there who wants to see Dean, Ellen said, then gestured with her head. She's at the bar. John went out into the bar and Ellen nodded. Ed toward a woman who sat on a stool near the pool tables. She was not very big, with long blonde hair. Ellen gestured with her eyes when John came up behind her, and the woman turned. Raising her eyebrows, she tilted her head. And who might you be? She asked archly. John Winchester, he said. And you are? Her eyes snapped mischievously. Princess Littlefeather, she said with a smirk. John blinked at her. She was older than she looked at first glance, he realized. Ellen snorted. Hell, if you'd told me that, we could have saved some time and anxiety. John, take her in the kitchen. I don't think you two need to be talking out here. John nodded and took a step back, gesturing for Grace Hanadarko to precede him. She wore jeans and a fleece-lined jacket over a very brief top, and there wasn't a purse in sight. A police officer alone in a hunter's bar, sort of the reverse of the situation Dean had found himself in on the night he'd met her. When they got into the kitchen, she walked a few feet inside and then turned around. So, where's Dean? Upstairs, sleeping, John said. He wasn't sure what he thought of this woman driving for a full day to visit Dean without even calling first. It seemed a little excessive. Why are you here? He asked. She smiled at him then, and reached into the pocket of her jeans to pull out a set of keys. Dangling them by the ring from her index finger, she held them out to him. For a moment he stared at them without understanding what she could possibly mean by them, then he recognized the whistle and snatched them off her hand. Where did you get these? He asked harshly. If it was at that site, shouldn't they be in evidence or something? That's kind of hard to explain, she said. And they weren't at the site. I have no idea where they were, to be honest. They were given to me. John stared hard at her. By who? He demanded. That's the part that's hard to explain, she replied evasively. Shoving her hands into her pockets, she rocked back on her heels. I'd really like to see Dean. He glowered down at her. Like I said, he's asleep, and we don't wake him if we can help it. John examined the keys in his hands, looking for some sign of trouble. Any hint of danger? He needs his rest. I'd imagine he does, Hanadarko said quietly. Her tone made him look up, and her eyes were sober. She seemed awfully mercurial, but he didn't doubt her sincerity. A clicking of paws sounded, and John turned to see Lucy coming into the room. Lucy, go on back upstairs, he said, but the dog ignored him, walking over to sniff Hanadarko carefully. Hanadarko squatted instantly and spoke to the dog. Hey there, Lucy, how ya doing? She was apparently familiar with dogs, because she waited until Lucy's examination was over and then started scratching an ear. You are a pretty girl, aren't you? Lucy's tail started wagging, and John caught himself thinking that if the dog liked her, she had to be okay. Shaking himself, he said, I don't know when Dean's going to. Where'd she come from? Hanadarko asked, interrupting him. What? It seemed like a complete non sequitur, and he couldn't figure out why she was asking. The dog, she said, rising after giving Lucy a final ear scratch. I'd be willing to bet you $50 that this dog appeared sometime soon after my phone call with Dean the other night, when he flipped out. Lucy nuzzled John's hand and then went upstairs. How do you know that? He demanded. Because, she paused, looking uneasy. Look, do you know a guy with dark hair and big baby blue eyes who wears a trench coat? John swallowed, his mouth gone dry. Why? Well, he showed up at my place shortly after I hung up with your friend Bobby, ready to smite me or something. Then he figured out I wasn't a threat and left again. John didn't know what to say. He had trouble imagining Castiel ready to smite anyone. I even shot him, because he just showed up out of nowhere and got all up in my face. Not that it seemed to faze him any. You shot Castiel, John exclaimed. If he hadn't seen the angel perfectly hale and hearty since then, he'd have been more worried, but he found the entire idea extremely disturbing. Is that his name? Hanadarko asked, nodding. Well, a little while later, He showed up again, all friendly with my dog, and he apologized. Then he asked me a bunch of questions about Gus, if I found him soothing. If he helped me with nightmares, and the way he talked about it, he was really there about the dog, if you take my drift. You're saying that Castiel showed up at your house to talk to you about your dog? Weird, huh? Hanadarko said. She started moving around, looking at things on shelves and generally fidgeting. So I told him yes and that Gus wakes me up out of nightmares sometimes, and he left again. Quote, you seem awfully calm about having a visitation from an angel, John observed. I know, she replied, and she turned around after a moment. See, it's not my first one. I have an angel that comes to see me from time to time. He showed up after Castiel left the first time in a tizzy because Castiel is some kind of soldier angel, and Earl thought he might have heard me. Earl, John repeated, feeling a little stunned and not altogether certain this woman was sane. Then he fiddled with the keys in his hand and knew something was going on beyond the normal. Your angel's name is Earl. I know, she said, eyes widening with exasperation. How is it I get an angel named Earl and you guys get one named Castiel? That's a way more angelic sounding name. Let me get this straight. You have an angel named Earl visiting you? Hanadarko nodded. Why, that's kind of a personal question, she said and returned his question like a volley. Why do you have one visiting you? He's here to protect Dean, John replied, a little puzzled by her claim that it was personal. Why did she have an angel? Why did he believe she had an angel? The keys in his hands were no guarantee. Nor was Lucis' apparent acceptance of her. Nevertheless, he believed her. From a serial killer? Hanadarko asked, looking startled. How much do you know? John asked, not sure what her angel might have told her. About what? About this case, about what's going on. I know that Dean was abducted last September, that the guy holding him killed a bunch of other people in the meantime. That Dean was tortured, but not how, exactly, and that when I caught the case regarding the site where Dean was held, Earl told me to steer clear of it. Earl your angel, yup, told you to steer clear of this case. Yup, and yet here you are. Not so good at following orders, Grace said, and John's eyebrows rose. Besides, I wanted to get Dean's keys back to him, and I kinda like the kid. So you don't know anything about the occultist, then? He hated that name, but it would have to do. I know he's a bastard who likes killing guys who never did him any harm, and I know he hurt the hell out of Dean. Beyond that, no, I don't know a thing. John shook his head, certain now that she had no idea about the demon and certain also that she shouldn't be told. Your angel was right, you should steer clear. She took a step towards him and gazed earnestly into his eyes. Look, I just drove up from Oklahoma to see Dean and give him back his keys. Is that so terrible? I want to see a friend who's been through hell and maybe offer him what comfort I can. You met him once, John pointed out, exasperated by this intense reaction. Yeah, Hanadarko said, shrugging. So, your kid makes a powerful impression, and he makes it quick. John found his resolve weakening, but he'd be damned if he'd wake Dean up for this. Even if he let her see him, it would be after Dean woke up on his own. Ellen appeared in the kitchen doorway, and they both turned. Hey, little feather, did you bring someone with you? She asked. Hanadarko went to the door and jerked it wider open. To reveal a dark-haired woman with glasses. She was just as tiny as her friend, and very pretty. Retta, I told you to stay in the car till I'd scope things out. It's been more than an hour, Grace. I slept for a while. But I had to. She turned and saw John. Hello, she said with a disarming smile. John stared at her for a moment, then nodded at Ellen who left, shutting the door behind the newcomer. You must be the pinky swear, best friend Dean mentioned. Her smile broadened with amusement. She put out her hand and advanced towards him. Hello, I'm Retta Rodriguez. John couldn't he? LP giving her an answering smile as he shook her hand. John Winchester, it's a pleasure to meet you. You're Dean's father? She asked, gazing up at him. John nodded. I have kids of my own, so I see. And he even begin to imagine what you're going through. John didn't quite know what to say to that. She didn't seem nearly old enough to be a mother, but it didn't matter. Hanadarko didn't give him a chance. Retta, the angel gave Dean a dog, she announced. Seriously, Retta exclaimed, sounding excited. I don't know that Castiel gave Dean the dog, John said. Clearly these two really were old-school best friends. Sharing every secret, she just showed up that morning. In Dean's bed, and they'd bonded instantly. John decided that he needed to have a talk with Castiel about his high-handed behavior. The morning after he asked me all about Gus, Grace pointed out. Castiel, Retta repeated. Dean's angel's name is Castiel. Before John could even speak, he heard the squeak of the steps behind him. And Sam came trotting down the stairs. Dad, what's going on? Dean's asking. He broke off when he got far enough into the kitchen to see that John had company. Hello, John grimaced. Sammy, these are Grace Hanadarko and Retta Rodriguez, he said. Ladies, this is my younger son, Sammy. Sam walked forward showing every evidence of his early training in manners. It's Sam, he said, shaking hands with each woman. To Hanadarko, he said, it's good to put a face to a name, detective. Call me Grace, she said. What's going on, Sam? John asked, well aware that the correction had been as much for him as for their new acquaintances. Dean's asking about dinner, and I didn't know what we were going to do since he pretty much slept through all the takeout hours. I could go out to the RV and put something together. Quote, why don't you do that? John said, and he looked at their guests. Ladies, have you eaten yet? It's been about 300 miles since then, Grace said, glancing at Retta. Why don't I give you a hand, Sam? Retta suggested. Sam glanced his way and John nodded slightly. Sure, the RV's out the back. He led her off, leaving Hanadarko alone with John again. I guess Dean's not asleep anymore, she said with a raised eyebrow. John shrugged. I guess not. Well, Lucy likes you, and I don't think Ellen will object. Come on up. Blank, underscore, blank. Retta looked up at the young man whose head nearly brushed the ceiling of the RV. So, you and your brother, you're really close. Unaccountably, Sam flushed and sort of shrugged. Well, Grace said he talked about you a lot, and before they left he told me you were a genius and would be interested in my line of work. This made Sam look even more uncomfortable. I was kind of a jerk in college, he said finally, but yeah, we're close. Ah, Retta said. You hit that phase. Phase, Sam repeated. Something a lot of guys go through, anywhere between 12 and 30, where they turn into raving jerks. Quote, Sam blinked at her and nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right, he said. She smiled and started chopping vegetables. You know, you are really tall, she said. I kind of shot up in college. Is your brother as tall as you? No, Dad and Dean are about the same height. I'm not sure where my height comes from. I don't know any other family besides Dad and Dean. That sounded like a sad situation, but Sam didn't sound sad about it. Very matter of fact, actually. She contemplated probing further, but decided not to. Silence fell for a few minutes, and EY both worked on putting dinner together. For such a young man, he had a strong grasp of healthy eating. He was prepping the chicken, and she was prepping the veggies for stir-fry. It must have been terrible, she said after a while. For all of you, I can't imagine what it would be like knowing one of my brothers was with a serial killer, or even that he had been with a serial killer. I mean, that sort of thing doesn't happen to real people. Or, rather, it does happen to real people, the people who get attacked are real people, but it doesn't happen to real people. She was being her usual articulate self. Fortunately, it didn't seem to matter. I get what you mean, Sam said. But you guys found him, you and your dad. Sam nodded, once again looking uncomfortable. That's just amazing. I can't believe the cops just blew you off like that. I didn't see the cops, Dad talked to them before he came and got me. Still, they blew him off, right? Yeah, but, Sam shrugged. What whoa, old you think if some guy told you that his 26-year-old son was missing, a guy with no fixed address, no job, and all he'd left behind was an old car. She looked at him over her glasses. I'd tell Grace, and Grace would take one look at the car and say that he'd been kidnapped. He smiled at her. I believe you would, he said, and his eyes shone with sincerity. Then he turned back to his chicken. But why would looking at the car tell Grace anything? Retta laughed. Grace is way into cars, she said. But not just any car. She's into cars with personality. I don't get that, Sam said. A car's a car. I mean, I know Dean loves the Impala, but for me it's just that thing we drove around in when I was a kid. Well, Grace's car is named Connie, she said. Dean hasn't named the Impala. Unless you count the fact that he calls it his baby. Oh, I imagine he calls her his baby, she said with sly grin, and Sam rolled his eyes. That counts. Have you named your car? She grew thoughtful for a moment. I don't think you name minivans, she said, and gazed at him solemnly until he started laughing and she joined in. But my husband calls his truck, bastard, now and again. You're married? Yes. she said, and she dried her hands off before digging her wallet out of her purse and flipping to her photos. Here, this is my husband, Ronnie, and these are my kids. That's my daughter May and my. She noticed that he was smiling, that fixed, polite smile that shouts louder than words. And you're just a little too young to be real interested in looking at photos of someone else's kids. Sam's eyes met hers, chagrined. I'm sorry, was it that obvious? Only to someone who is actually aware that she shows her pictures way too often and easily, Retta said, and his face crinkled into a grin. He had the cutest dimples. But you'll want to see the picture of holy cow. His eyes widened. What, holy cow, she said, flipping through the album to find the photo. She has the face of Jesus on her side. What, he said again, and she finally found the picture. Turning to show it to him, she saw his eyes go even wider. That's photoshopped. It is not, she said defensively. She lives in my barn. And she looks just like that. Grace picked her up at a livestock auction. Sam stared at the photograph, shaking his head. Seriously, the cow actually looks like that? He asked. The woman seemed entirely sincere, and she didn't seem the type to lie over something like that. Cross my heart and hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Sam had never heard an adult say that whole thing. And he found it somewhat startling, especially since she really did cross her heart. Grinning up at him, she added. We think it's a sign from God. From God, Sam repeated incredulously. Well, maybe not from God directly, but a sign from Earl, at any rate. This seemed even weirder. Maybe she wasn't a liar, maybe she was just crazy. Earl, Retta looked up at him. Grace's angel, I wouldn't even mention him. But I know you've got an angel, too. Stunned, Sam didn't even try to dissemble. He's Dean's angel. I don't have an angel. Right, Retta said. That's what I meant. You've got an angel hanging around. Have you seen him? Sure, Sam said. He helped us rescue Dean. But how do you know about him? He came after Grace on the night of the phone call, Retta replied. All ready to smite her until he figured out she wasn't a threat. Saws, Sam said, staring. Ready to smite her? Dreamy guy with dark hair and blue eyes, wearing a trench coat over a suit. Retta asked. Sam shook his head. I don't know about Dreamy, but the rest is right. But I don't wait, you mean the night Dean freaked out while he was talking to her? Retta nodded. He might have misunderstood, I guess. But I've never seen him like that. Sam considered that statement. On the other hand, I've almost always seen him when Dean was there. How is he with Dean? Soothing, friendly and awkward. But he's pretty much always awkward. Not very well socialized, you know. Sam's eyes caught the photo of the holy cow, and he remembered the genesis of this conversation. So, you think Earl sent Grace a cow with the face of Jesus on it? What kind of an angel is he? Pratfalls and stunts. Retta gazed at him for a moment, then closed her album and stuck it in her purse. I'm not sure I should say, she said, and she returned to chopping carrots and celery. It's kind of private. Oh, Sam said, kind of surprised by the sudden withdrawal. He hoped he hadn't offended her. Castiel is a soldier. Retta looked up and nodded. Yeah, that's what Grace said Earl told her. She pursed her lips. Earl is he's like a counselor. A shrink, Sam interpolated. Shish, Retta hissed, just like she thought anyone could hear them out here. Don't say anything like that to Grace, or tell her I said he was like a counselor. She'd freak out and make Earl's life a living hell. Earl's life, well, she's angry, and she doesn't like being interfered with. Does Earl interfere with her? He encourages her to do the right thing and discourages her from doing the wrong things. You know, that doesn't sound half bad, Sam said, thinking of some of his decisions over the past few years. Of course, if someone had come up to him and told him the right path to take, he probably would have growled at them and taken the wrong path just to spite them. But I can see how she'd get upset, he said. For example, Earl told her to stay away from this case. Even back before we knew what case it was, when we just had a building and no bodies. He did, Sam said. Why? He said it was dangerous. He's not wrong, Sam said. He'd moved from ching chicken into strips to chopping garlic and ginger. It's really, really bad. I mean, it's a good thing Grace is out of it. Grace is an amazing cop, Retta said, feeling slightly defensive. She faces danger every day. Not this kind of danger, Sam replied, shivering. Look, I can see how a serial killer would freak you out, but that's what cops do. I mean, I don't like the idea of her going after some crazy psychopath with a knife, but it's not that simple, Sam said, finding the images her words called up disturbing. The dreams hadn't disturbed him for weeks, but they were all too easily called to mind. He realized belatedly that his tone had been a little harsh, but she didn't seem intimidated. I don't understand, Retta said, tilting her head. Sam grimaced. He's not a psychopath, he's a demon. She didn't respond for a long moment, and he just knew her next call was going to be for the men in the white coats. I know how crazy that sounds, he added, turning towards her. But she wasn't looking incredulous or disdainful or like she thought he was insane. No, I'm Catholic, I believe in demons, you mean a real, honest-to-goodness demon. Like in The Exorcist demon? Yeah, Sam replied, knitting his brows. Sort of, without the split pea soup. He looks like any normal guy, in fact, he is a normal guy. The guy the demon's possessing isn't responsible for any of this. Though he'll go down in history as a serial killer. Retta seemed disturbed by this. How do you get a demon to leave you alone? I'm assuming it's kind of hard to arrest them and put them in prison. Sam snorted. Kind of, he agreed. There's exorcism, but that just sends them back to hell, he added. But they can come back up, find a new host and start over. They've been researching to see if there's a way to kill them. How can you kill a demon? They're eternal. I don't know. Nobody knows how to kill a demon. Nobody's ever killed a demon, at least nobody who ever wrote it down. And it's really hard to find anything legitimate these days, what with all the Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy novels, horror movies and MMORPGs out there. Where would you find legitimate stuff on how to kill demons? Retta asked. Sam shrugged. Bobby's got some books by a French arcanist from the 14th century that look promising. He turned around and opened the book carefully on the table. Retta peered around him. My goodness, that's incredible. What language is it in? Parts of it are in Old High French, parts are in Latin, and there's a few bits in Greek. You read all those? I've studied Latin since I was a kid, I took French in college, and I've got a dictionary for the Greek. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. If there's a way to kill that monster, I'm going to find it. I'm sure you will, she said, giving him a look that made him feel 10 feet tall. But we'd better finish up dinner. Blank. Grace followed John up the stairs. It seemed odd, somehow, to find a convalescent staying in a bar, but this seemed a comfortable, homey kind of place, and clearly someone did live here. Who's Ellen? She asked, and John paused at the top of the stairs, turning slightly. What? You said, Ellen wouldn't mind. Who's Ellen? You met her. The woman at the bar. Ellen Harville. She owns the place. She your girlfriend? Grace asked. John had turned away again, but he looked back down at her. Just a friend, he said solemnly. I'm a widower. Grace nodded, and he went on up the stairs. She went after him, a little stunned by his pronouncement. If she recalled correctly, the man had been a widower for over 20 years. It seemed a long-ass time to stay that attached. He led her down a hallway till there was only one door. She put a hand on his arm and held him back, putting a finger to her lips. He watched, clearly puzzled as she edged forward. Then she gave her best war whoop and ran inside. Dean was sitting up on a bed. So she hopped on and bounced, still whooping. While Dean was still staring at her in befuddlement, Grace surged forward and kissed him by way of a thorough greeting. The high-pitched Indian war whoop caught Ellen by surprise. Half a dozen hunters started from their seats and looked up in alarm. What the hell was that? Whittier exclaimed. Calm down, it was probably just Princess Littlefeather, Ellen said, raising her voice a little. Who? Marvin asked. Friend of Dean's, nothing to worry about. Whittier grinned and nudged Marvin. Hope he has fun, the lucky bugger. Marvin snorted. Lucy took exception to Grace's impetuous entrance, jumping to her feet on the bed and barking at the intruder. Grace came to a stop on her knees, allowing the bounce of the mattress to subside. Dean seemed equally stunned by her appearance and by his dog's reaction to it. Sorry, girl, Grace said. And Lucy's barking stopped immediately, followed by a short, sharp, offended yip. Grace blinked at her. There's no need to get snippy about it, she said. This seemed only to increase the dog's sense of affront. Lucy, it's okay, Dean said. This is my friend Grace. Oh, she likes me fine, we met downstairs, Grace said. Lucy gave Dean a lick on the hand, then directed another offend. Ed yipped at Grace before hopping off the bed and stalking out of the room, right past John who was gazing at them in silent amusement. Well, I'll leave you two to get reacquainted, he said with a smile and left. Dean watched his father go. then turned to her with a big ol' grin. Grace, how are you? Never better. How are you? She looked more closely at him and saw the bags under his eyes, and T. He lines that appeared to have been engraved in his face by pain. Fine, Dean said, still grinning ear to ear. How's Retta? She and your brother are fixing dinner, Grace replied. But, you remember when you met her? Dean nodded. She was pregnant with her first then, but nobody knew it yet. Her first? Dean asked, his eyes widening. How many does she have? She has a minivan, Grace replied morosely. Dean's lip curled in dismay. Really? Grace nodded, but then Dean brightened. How's Connie? She's downstairs, Grace replied. She is? Dean asked, and he immediately got off the bed and started pulling on his clothes. Well, I see how I rate, Grace said, watching him tart himself up for her car. I didn't know you were coming, he said. Why did you come? Well, I wanted to see you, and Retta did too. Besides, it seems like we've got something in common. Dean raised his eyebrows. What I want to know is why you rate an angel with an angelic name, and I get an angel named Earl. Dean's eyes widened as he zipped up his jeans. Excuse me, he said in a weak voice. Your angel's name is Castiel, she said, and his eyes widened further. Before she could finish, he interrupted her. How do you know about that? Dean asked. He came to see me, she said, and his brows drew together in a strange, unhappy expression. He tried to smite me, she went on, and his jaw dropped. He did what? It was that night when I called you, when you flipped out on the phone. Dean nodded, looking embarrassed. Well, I guess you alarmed him, what with knocking Sam over and trying to run away. I knocked Sam over? Dean asked, sounding startled. Grace decided not to bring up the possibility of concussion that Bobby had mentioned on the phone. Anyway, Castiel seemed to think I was to blame for what happened. And that I'd done it on purpose. What happened? Dean asked. He came into my place, full of righteous anger, and demanded who I worked for. I had no idea he was Angel. He's nothing like Earl. For one thing, he's good looking, and so I ran for my gun, telling him to get out and mind his own business. The next thing I know, he's right in front of me, asking again. When I told him I worked for the Oklahoma City Police Department, he seemed mighty surprised. He called himself an idiot and left. My angel called himself an idiot? Dean asked, seeming perturbed by this. Well, I think so. It wasn't exactly clear, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't calling me an idiot. He didn't hurt you, did he? Dean seemed worried and uncertain, like it didn't sound like the angel he knew. Grace shrugged cheerily. Nope, he just scared the piss out of me. If anyone did any hurting, it was me. What? Well, I tried to hit him with a beer bottle, and I shot him. You shot him? Dean exclaimed, his eyes widening. Before she could reassure him that it hadn't done the angel any real harm, he turned away. Saws, he called to the empty air. Saws. The dark-haired man appeared out of nowhere in front of Dean. Yes, Dean. His eyes flicked to her and then back to Dean, but he didn't address her presence. Grace was staring, stunned. She'd seen him disappear, but seeing him appear, seeing him come at Dean's call, it was a little startling. Unnerving, even. Are you okay? Dean demanded. Before Castiel could answer, he turned to Grace. Where did you shoot him? She pointed dumbly to the lower chest. And Dean started pulling Castiel's shirt out of his pants. The angel was too stunned to react for a moment, so Grace got a good look at his belly and lower ribs before he managed to smooth the shirt down and push Dean away. I am fine, Dean. That was days ago, and I cannot be harmed by an ordinary gun. He didn't even blink, Grace put in helpfully. And I frightened her unduly, Castiel added. He gazed at Dean. Is that all you needed? I wanted to be sure you were okay, Dean said defensively. The angel's eyes warmed slightly, allowing Grace a glimpse of the deep and abiding affection this Castiel held for Dean. He took the young man by the shoulders in a firm, comforting grip. I am fine, Dean, the angel said. She could not have harmed me in any way. Grace felt a little offended by that. But she didn't quite like to interrupt an angel who had almost smited her. Smote her. Smitten. Who had almost struck her down, at any rate. After a moment of end communication that Grace couldn't begin to read, Castiel released Dean's shoulders and took a step back. A second later he was gone, and he didn't bother using the door. Dean didn't speak immediately, and finally Grace had to break the silence. Wow, she said, letting out a deep sigh. Dean turned towards her. Where's Connie? He asked brightly. Grace could see that he didn't want to talk about what had just happened. And she was amenable. Downstairs in the parking lot. Get a sweater or something on. Come on. Dean pulled off the bathrobe he'd been wearing, and Grace saw dark bloodstains on his white t-shirt. They didn't look fresh, but they also didn't look even a day old. What happened? She asked. Dean glanced down and flushed. I had a little panic attack earlier, opened a few things up. He grimaced and pulled off his shirt to reveal a torso swathed in bandages. When are you going after the lost princess? She asked, raising her eyebrows. In the middle of pulling on a fresh t-shirt. He stopped and stared at her. What are you talking about? She raised her arms in front of her and lurched like the movie Mummy from the 30s, groaning, and Dean glanced down at his own body and chuckled. Sammy's kind of paranoid. No kidding. The mummy wrap is kind of a clue. He had progressed to just covering the worst spots, but when I managed to open things up today, he reverted. He shrugged and tried to conceal a wince. I have to believe they'll heal enough not to open up at some point. Otherwise, my brother will be following me around for the next 50 years with bandages. And ointment. And disinfectant. Disinfectant, Grace repeated. He disinfects you. No, he disinfects every bathroom I might walk by, Dean said with a grin. He pulled on a flannel shirt over his fresh t-shirt. Come on, let's go downstairs. Grace followed Dean down the stairs, a little freaked out by the thought that even after 6 weeks in the hospital, Dean's injuries still hadn't fully healed. She knew nothing at all about what had actually happened beyond the fact that he was cut on. She found herself wondering how extensive the injuries under his bandages were. It wasn't the kind of thing she could ask Dean, though, and she wasn't sure there was anyone else she could ask, except maybe Denson the next time he showed up in Oklahoma City. Asking John or Sam would be tacky, asking Dean would be unkind. And asking Earl would be pointless. When they got down to the bar, Lucy trotted up, and Dean gave her head a quick rub. He started across the bar, the dog at his heels, but as he headed for the door, John walked over. Where do you think you're going? Outside, Dad, to look at a car. Well, you can't go out like that. He reached out seemingly at random and plucked a coat off the rack. Put this on. Dean stared at him for a moment, then snatched the coat and stomped out of the bar, Lucy close behind him. As she left, Grace heard someone yell, "Hey!" Evidently John had grabbed some other guy's coat. And the other guy objected. She figured John could deal with it. Blank, underscore, blank. Dad wasn't wrong, it was chill out here, but Dean didn't need babysat, by God. He walked straight over to Connie, recognizing her lines easily amid the other vehicles. Looking good, he murmured, putting the coat down on the next car over. Pop the hood. Grace grinned at him and went to the driver's door. A moment later, the hood lockdown released, and Dean reached in to undo the latch, raising the hood so he could look things over. Grace didn't care for her car on her own. But her mechanic clearly loved the car at least as much as she did. The engine was just about clean enough to eat off, and he'd bet it ran smooth. Grace had come around to THEN to stand beside him while Lucy examined the car in her own way. You know, you might should put that coat on. It's not mine, Dean said. I don't want to chance bleeding on it. Are you bleeding now? No, but if I have a panic attack, I might. You planning on having one of those? You don't plan on panic attacks, he said irritably. You do if you've got any sense of what causes them, she replied. And Dean turned towards her in surprise. She shrugged. It's not so much that you plan on having one, but that you plan on being prepared for one if you know you're going to be in a situation that might trigger one. Exactly, Dean said. What about looking into the engine of my car is likely to trigger a panic attack? Grace asked, holding out the coat. Dean huffed low in his throat, but he put it on. I also don't want to get any oil on it, Dean remarked, reaching in to pull out the dipstick, but then he realized that he'd failed to bring anything with him to wipe it off with. He seriously needed to pull it together. I checked her oil before I set out, Grace said mildly. And I'll check it again before I go back. Lucy came around the front end again and hopped up, putting her feet on the bumper and peering into the engine compartment. Grace snickered, and Dean gave his dog a quick scratch on the ear. Dad arrived about then, and Dean grabbed the cloth he had in his hand. Obviously Dad's brain was working, even if his wasn't. Dean pulled out the dipstick, wiped it off and then put it back in. He lost himself in evaluating the car's state. There was pleasure in using skills he'd honed over years. Skills that had nothing whatsoever to do with hunting. Lucy dropped down to sit beside him, leaning against his leg, and he paused to stroke her head. Grace hovered, watching him, and so did Dad. Dean ignored them both, except when he commented to Grace on some shortfall in maintenance. He was about finished when a yell from behind made him whirl. Dean, what are you? Sam, carrying a foil-covered bowl in his hands, strode across the lot, weaving around poorly parked cars and trucks. Where'd that coat come from? He demanded, shoving the bowl and attendant potholders into John's hands. It's nowhere near heavy enough if you're going to be out here for any length of time. And are you wearing your thermals? Sammy, you're overreacting, Dean protested, evading his brother's hand on his arm. Retta, hi. Retta had followed Sam over, and she was looking on with wide eyes. She held a bowl in her hands, as well, a smaller bowl. Lucy immediately hurried over to check her out. Retta saw the dog and squealed. Shoving her bowl into Grace's hands, she squatted and greeted Lucy at her level. What a pretty girl you are, she exclaimed, kneading Lucy's ears. Lucy licked her on the nose. And she giggled, looking up. Hey there, Dean, dinner's ready. She stood back up and took the bowl from Grace. Why don't we all go inside? That was an easy suggestion to accede to. Especially since Sammy wasn't making it. He looked ready to drag Dean back inside by the hair. Dean tried to take the bowl from Retta, but she shook her head and gave him a gentle shove with her shoulder. Go on, kid, before your brother busts something. Grimacing, Dean put his hands in the pockets of his borrowed coat. Grace, you need to get your tires rotated. Yes, Dean, Grace said in a voice brimming with laughter. He gave her a sidelong look. Your siblings ever do this crap to you? Grace glanced back at Sammy, who was now haranguing their dad about letting Dean go outside in this weather. Not really, but nothing like this has ever happened to me. Thank God, Dean said fervently, the image making his heart race a little. You shouldn't be here, you know. It's not safe to be around me. I can't make them leave, no matter how hard I try, but you and Retta should go home. We are going home, Retta said, then she added with a smile, but do you mind if we eat first, and maybe visit a while? Dean sighed. I guess, he said, giving her a sidelong look. How's the family? I hear you've got a minivan. Ellen ran everyone out at 2 in the morning. She had guests upstairs, and even though they weren't here to see her, she felt odd not being up there. Besides, there were only 4 guys left by then because the Winchesters had stayed upstairs long enough. That their devoted fans didn't feel like sticking around. Weird-ass situation, she thought, but looking in the till, she reflected that she might be able to take a European vacation if the Winchesters stayed a while longer. Right after Grace and John went upstairs, Lucy had come downstairs. Initially, Ellen thought she was just jealous of her master's visitor, but her behavior didn't seem to suggest that. She'd wandered through the bar, sniffing all and sundry, not missing a single soul. One guy made to kick her away, but before Ellen could even speak, Dwight informed the transgressor that the dog belonged to Dean Winchester and that he might want to think twice before acting like a bastard. Most of the guys seemed entirely tolerant, and a few even offered her caresses. Then Dean had come down and Lucy had gone with him and that Oklahoma police officer out to see a car, presumably hers. Good night, Dwight, Ellen said, pushing her last customer out the door so she could close it. See you next time. One more for the. She shut and locked the door on his thoroughly illegal request, then turned back to Joe. We can clean up in the morning, she suggested, and Joe seemed willing. EY went upstairs together to find John standing in the hallway, looking lost. What is it, John? Ellen asked. He gave her a helpless look. Sam appears to be pouring his heart out to Retta, and Dean is having a heart-to-heart with Grace. I don't seem to fit into either situation, and I have no idea where Bobby's gotten to. Ellen glanced into the dining room and saw Sam and Retta gathering up tea. He dishes from dinner while he talked earnestly and she listened with a sympathetic expression. Where are Dean and Grace? They shut themselves up in the room he was napping in earlier, John replied. Joe gave both of them an irritated look and slipped past them into the dining room where she started helping Sam and Retta with the dishes. Blank. Dean didn't mind snuggling in next to Grace. She was sensual and sexy, but she could be entirely cuddly, too, and cuddly was more his speed at the moment. It also didn't seem to perturb Lucy nearly as much as the bouncing had. He sat on the bed, against the headboard, between 2 lovely ladies who weren't even jealous of each other. So, how are you feeling, really? Grace asked. And I don't mean physically. Duh, and sighed and leaned his head on her shoulder. I don't know, he said after a long moment. Wrecked, I guess. Yeah, Grace said, not offering pity, not telling him it was normal, not uttering platitudes. It made a nice change. How so? Dean snorted. For one, I can't stand for my little brother to be out of sight for more than an hour or so. She didn't say anything for a second, then she cleared her throat. Your brother and not your dad. Dad can take care of himself, Dean said without thinking, then bit his lip. Sam can't, Grace asked. Her tone was neutral, totally lacking in judgment. I don't honestly know. It's been years since we spent any time together. Years since Dean had seen his brother in a critical situation. She'd actually brought up an important point that Dean would have to think about later. But it doesn't really matter. He shrugged. I raised that kid. Mom died when I was 4 and Dad took us on the road. Sam and me were it. That must have been rough. Sometimes. Mostly it just was. Dean shook his head. I barely knew anything else, and I knew, he trailed off, realizing suddenly that he couldn't tell Grace that he knew his father was a hero. He couldn't explain why, and without the facts, it would just sound lame. You knew what? I knew my dad was just doing what he had to do, Dean said. He contemplated the ups and downs of his childhood and sighed. So are you afraid this guy will come after Sam, is that it? Grace asked. Dean's heart skipped a beat and then sped up. Images began to swim in his mind, memories of Azazel telling him that he'd grab Sammy if he didn't obey instantly. With an effort he kept the hysterical fit from developing past a mild bout of hyperventilation, but when he came to himself, he was curled into Grace's arms, his head tucked under her chin. She stroked his back gently, murmuring apologies over and over again. It's okay, Grace, he said, and his voice sounded oddly hoarse. He cleared his throat. Sorry you had to see that. No worries, Grace replied. Sorry I set it off. Dean grimaced. You couldn't know, he said, resisting what was almost a physical need to go check on Sam. He had to get past this. Grace was gazing at him with her eyebrows raised. Dean swallowed. The bastard regularly said he'd go get Sammy, that he'd do to him what he'd done to me. Oh, damn, sorry, Grace muttered. You okay now? Dean gave her a smile, and her eyes lit a little. Yeah, mostly, he said, amazed that he'd managed to keep from leaping off the bed to search Sam out. He chuckled. Hell, this is probably the closest I'll get to a woman from now on. Grace gave him a disbelieving look. What's that supposed to mean? He stroked down the front of his t-shirt self-consciously, aware of the bandages. You haven't seen what I look like under all this, he said. No woman is ever going to want to have sex with me once she's seen the pictograms carved all over me. He shuddered. Except the really sicko, weird ones. And I don't want anything to do with them. She gazed at him for a long moment, then leaned in and gave him a lingering kiss. When the kiss had ended, she didn't move back. EY's locked to his in an intense moment of communication, and she said, I promise you, I'll be coming back to take up where that left off. She licked her lips. Just as soon as you're up to it. He shook his head weakly. Grace, you can't know. It doesn't matter, she said. Whatever's been done to you has nothing to do with why I want you. Her lips touched his briefly but sensuously. Then she licked his nose and fell back, laughing at his outraged expression. Dean stared at her, split between amusement and anxiety. Anxiety won, but he wasn't letting it take over. You want to see a sample of what he did? I thought your brother would freak out if we undid any of his handiwork, Grace asked. He flushed a little, remembering the whispered suggestions that had led to his confiding that factoid to her. Those aren't the only spots. The cuts on my leg healed better than the others. Sammy thinks it's because Azazel didn't have the opportunity to give it any of his. The word treatment still gave him the cold shivers. He slid sideways off the bed, ignoring the twinges the movement gave him, and undid his fly. He pulled his pants down to reveal the pinkish scars on his thigh. The stuff on my torso is more complicated, and some of it seems to be healing with funny colors under the skin. Grace crawled across the bed and examined his leg closely. Dean had a sinking feeling. He found it more fascinating than horrifying, he thought he'd go utterly insane. My God, these cuts are incredibly precise. I've never seen anything like it. Dean gulped. He was nuts, thought he was a demon, thought these were spells. So he was extra careful. Though he recognized her interest as professional, not prurient, it still made him uncomfortable. He pulled his pants back up. What wham, and is going to want to have sex with a guy who has to wear a shirt to keep from inducing nausea. Dean, you're cute and you're funny when you're not whining. Dean's eyes widened. I am not whining. She gave him a dubious look with a little grin playing about her lips, then she reached out and stroked down his sides, her hands coming to rest on his hips. And you have an awesome body though yo. You need to get off your lazy ass and get back in shape. As a crowning insult, she goosed him on the butt. He jerked involuntarily, and she winked at him. Well, fun as this is, Retta and I should probably hit the road. Dean nodded, stepping back so she could get up. Yeah, and you really shouldn't come back, no matter how tempting that promise was. It's not safe to be around me, and you have no protections. She laughed, shaking her head. I can take care of myself. She leaned in and kissed him again, this time a sisterly peck on the cheek. I'll be back when you're up to a romp. Before he could respond, she opened the door and strode out, calling Retta's name. Dean followed, biting back curses. He wanted to find some way to convince her, but he didn't think a conversation that included Ed Retta or his father would achieve anything. He had no idea which side Retta would come down on. They didn't know the whole truth, even if they did believe in angels, and his father would go all didactic and authoritarian. And there would be an argument that would solidify her determination. He could just tell that her stubbornness would rival his father's. Yeah, Retta said, emerging from the dining room. Dean saw his father standing in the hall, talking to Ellen. Joe and Sam came out of the dining room behind Retta. Where's Bobby? He asked. Seeing Sam relieved him, but it seemed odd to him that everyone else was in such close proximity to each other, but Bobby wasn't there. He headed out with Zach Garza, Joe said. Guess Zach has something he needs some information on. He told me he'd be back in the morning. Dean shook his head. Zach who? Who's that? Do we know him? John nodded. I know him. It will be fine, Dean. Aware of startled eyes on him from all sides, Dean relaxed himself consciously. Right, of course, he said, and looked down at his feet. We need to be heading out, Grace said, putting an arm around his shoulders and squeezing gently. You ready to go, Retta? She nodded and turned to get her purse. Thanks for coming out, Dad said, walking forward and shaking Grace's hand. It brightened the evening for all of us. Grace shrugged and something seemed to pass between them that Dean couldn't read. Sam had followed Retta when she'd disappeared, and they came back talking quietly. Dean wondered what they were talking about, but he'd been right thinking that the two of them would hit it off. Grace took a step towards him and Dean looked down at her. Please don't come out to see us off, okay, Dean? She said, patting his cheek. We wouldn't want your dad and your brother to explode. Quote, sighing, Dean agreed. As she started to turn away, he caught her arm. Grace, he started, and clearly recognizing that he was about to tell her again not to come back. She touched his lips gently with her forefinger. Hush, Dean, she said. Take care of yourself, and that big little brother of yours. Dean nodded. Watching her and Retta go, he reflected that he'd always tried to take care of Sammy. He'd always tried, and he always would try. Whether or not he'd succeed was anyone's guess. Blank. John watched the cute little Porsche drive away. He found, oddly, that he trusted those women even though they gave him very uneasy feelings. Women hunting, or fighting, or in danger of any kind always made him a bit uneasy, though he tried not to show it. When they chose to participate in that sort of occupation, they generally didn't appreciate it when members of the opposite sex tried to get overly protective. He walked back inside to find Ellen wiping down the bar. I thought you were headed to bed, he said. Soon, she replied. John, why don't you and the boys stay inside? It's warmer, we've got plenty of protections. And it would be more comfortable for Sam to have a bed that's longer than he is. John could see the validity of that argument, but he wasn't yet ready to give up the comparative defensibility of the RV. The house had a lot of rooms, a lot of doors and windows, and there was no way to see all of them at the same time. He also didn't really know the ground. He didn't know where to find a weapon in every room. He didn't know where the protections were or what they were, and the house wasn't mobile. He couldn't jump into the front seat and drive away if all else failed. Thanks, but no, I'd better go check on Sam and Dean. Quote, Ellen nodded and dropped the rag on the counter. Evidently she'd just been waiting for him and unwilling, or unable, to stand idle. John started up the stairs and found Sam and Dean coming down them. They both looked exhausted. Bedtime, boys, he said. No argument here, Dad, Dean said. Come on, Sasquatch. John backed down the stairs and stepped aside to let them through. As they walked away, Dean kept talking. How is it you got to be so tall? Dad's not as tall as you. Mom wasn't a giant. I think there's mutant genes in there somewhere. It was your grandfather, John said absently. And both of them stopped. What did you say? Dean asked, his eyes wide. Sam looks a lot like Mary's father, John replied, not sure why his sons were looking at him as though he'd grown an extra head. And Samuel was very tall. Wait, I was named after my grandfather. Sam asked. Actually, both of you were named after one of your grandparents, John said. I thought your dad's name was Henry. Dean said. You're named after your maternal grandmother, John said. Now go to bed. Sam crowed with laughter. Look who's girly now. Dean gave him a hearty smack in the gut. Shut up, he growled. Wait, mom's name was Dean. Deanna, John said. And Sammy here was named after the grandfather he looks like. John snorted. That's a coincidence. It's not like we could tell. I mean, yeah, they were both bald, but beyond that, he shrugged. Not that old Samuel would have cared. Sam blinked at him. Why not? I wasn't your grandpa's idea of a suitable husband for his girl. Sam looked startled, but Dean grinned. Go, Dad, he said. Rocking the bad boy thing, huh? John shook his head. No, Dean, he said with a small smile. I was an Eagle Scout. Both his boys stared at him with slack jaws. Why is that so surprising? I guess it's just not how we see you, Sam said, glancing at Dean for an assenting nod. So, why didn't he like you, then? A couple of reasons, John said with a shrug. Number 1, he didn't want his daughter to marry any man who was stupid enough, or naive enough, or whatever, to enlist on purpose. Wait, you weren't drafted? Sam asked. No, both boys were still staring at him. We were in the middle of a war, he said simply. Police action, Dean said with the same knee-jerk reflex as someone would say, bless you, after a sneeze. John gave his eldest a narrow look. I know a war when I see one, boy, he said, and Dean flushed a little. Yeah, but Vietnam, Sam shook his head, seeming appalled. That took guts. Sam, no one over here knew how bad it was, John said with a grimace. I was naive, and stupid, and it was all ultimately pointless. At least with what we do, we know we're making a difference. Sam nodded slowly, his expression sober. Dean broke the silence that followed John's remark. So, what was the other reason? He asked. John's lips twisted. Well, I don't know this for a fact. But since I've learned more about your mom's family, I really think it was because I was a civilian. Sam nodded, but Dean looked puzzled. A civilian, he repeated. You were a Marine. I wasn't a hunter. Samuel didn't want his daughter marrying out. Dean's jaw dropped, and, too late, John realized that this subject hadn't come up in the weeks since they'd found him. Dean sat abruptly, coming to rest on the steps. Both John and Sam reached for him, but he sat there stunned. He looked up, his eyes seeking his father's. Mom was a hunter. Yeah, Dean, John said. I've only known for the last 6 or 7 months. But she was Mrs. PTA, Dean said. She made cookies. Oh yeah, John said, feeling a bit nostalgic. Mary loved a good bake sale. You've never talked about her much, Sam said. Mom was a hunter, Dean said again. Both her parents were hunters, John replied. She was raised in the tradition. So, did Mom hunt after you guys got married? Sam asked. No, I don't think that was what she wanted. He shook his head. He sighed. She wanted you, he said, looking at Dean. She wanted 2.5 kids and a normal life. She never said anything to me about hunting. No one with half a kid has a normal life, Dean quipped, but he still looked a little stunned. You made her so happy, Dean, John said. Way happier than I ever made her. Dad, Dean protested, shaking his head. No, really, Dean, John said, remembering certain nights that he'd spent in a cheap motel during arguments. She loved me, but she was happiest with you. More memories started cascading back. Memories of better, happier times. Dean's birth and the joy he and Mary had shared, Sam's birth, the wedding. I miss her, he said, and he realized that he was about to cry. I miss her every damned day. Blank, underscore, blank. The naked truth in that last remark left Dean stunned, and before either he or Sam could formulate a response, Dad turned around and walked away. Sam sank down next to Dean. That's more than he's ever said about Mom before, he said, and Dean nodded soberly. Hell, it's more than you've ever said about Mom. What do you mean? Dean asked, giving Sam a puzzled look. You never told me she made cookies. Dean blinked at his brother. I was 4, she was my mom. Of course she made cookies. Not all moms make cookies. Yeah, they do, Dean replied. Sam shook his head, shrugging. Some of them buy cookies. Dude, those aren't moms, Dean said. Those are mothers. Sam stared at him. So we had a mom. Oh yeah, Dean said. He sighed. She was awesome. He dragged himself back up. Come on, it's time for bed. Grace woke up as the sun rose and glanced out the window in time to see the Kansas state line flash by. Want to stop and let me drive a while? She asked. Nah, I'm good, Retta replied. Grace studied her friend's profile. She looked anxious, worried about something. They'll be fine, Retta, she said. With his family around him. Dean will be fine. Yeah, always assuming Sam figures out how to kill that thing, Retta replied, grimacing. Grace blinked at her. Thing? What thing? The thing, Retta said. The demon. She said it like she thought Grace should know what she was talking about. Grace knit her brows. You sure you don't need a rest? No, Retta said, giving her an irritated look. Why would I need a rest? You're the one talking about demons, Grace replied. Retta didn't say anything for a couple of miles, and Grace wondered what she should say. Where the heck was this demon thing coming from? Grace opened her mouth, but Retta spoke before she could. Not now, Retta said, but not in her normal voice. She spoke in her Mama Retta voice, and Grace found herself responding with obedience despite profound irritation. Retta took the next exit and drove into the parking lot of a restaurant, stopping the car with a jerk and putting the parking brake on. Okay, what did John and Dean tell you happened? Grace stared at her. I didn't really ask, Retta. We know what happened, more or less. She grimaced. I saw the cuts on his leg, and he says they're a pale imitation of what's on his torso. That guy was freaky. Retta shook her head. Sam, I think Sam told me more about what happened than they told you. What are you talking about? The reason Dean's so freaked out about you going after this guy is that the guy isn't a guy, he's a demon possessing a guy. Retta, that's crazy, Grace protested. The guy was just a guy. A dentist from Illinois, who's never gotten more than a traffic ticket. Retta demanded. Besides, wouldn't you rather believe that it was a demon doing all these awful things and not just a guy? There's no such thing as demons, Retta, Grace growled. There are angels, Retta retorted. That doesn't mean there are demons. Retta blinked at her real fast for several seconds, like she was revving her brain up. Grace bit her lip, waiting for a zinger. So, Grace Hanadarko, you're telling me that you believe in the forces of good but not in the forces of evil. That's not what I said, Retta. Humanity provides plenty of evil all on its own. Duh, Retta said. But that still doesn't mean there aren't demons, and Sam was researching ways to kill them. Sam was pulling your leg, Grace said. I don't think so, not with the 15th century French manuscript he showed me. Grace rolled her eyes. Ask Earl, Retta challenged her. I would, but unlike Dean's angel, my angel doesn't show up when I call him. Dean's angel comes when Dean calls him. He does. I saw him. You saw the angel again. I did. Grace grinned at the memory. I saw his abs. His abs, Retta exclaimed, her eyes widening. You saw angelic abs? Grace nodded. Why? How? Well, you know I shot him, right? Retta nodded wordlessly. I told Dean and he freaked. He started yelling Castiel's name, and the angel just showed right up. Dean asked where I shot him, and then started digging Castiel's shirt out of his pants so he could check it out. I caught quite a glimpse before Castiel stopped him. Dean stripped his angel, Retta asked incredulously, and Grace shrugged. So, they're supposed to be gender neutral. Did he look? She was waving her hand in a region that left no doubt as to the subject of her question. He didn't get that far, Grace said. All I saw were abs, and the angel has a nice six-pack. Man, I wish I could get a look at him since this one doesn't make you forget what he looks like the minute he's gone. Grace shrugged. Blue eyes, dark hair, I could do a composite if you wanted. I want. Grace glanced over at her and then across the parking lot. You hungry? Yeah, actually, let's hit that Denny's before we head out again. Sure. Once they were seated, Retta headed off to the bathroom and Grace seized her opportunity. She pulled out her phone and started scanning through the numbers, looking for John. His phone went to voicemail, and Grace guessed he was probably asleep. She sighed and scrolled through the numbers aimlessly. When she let her finger up, she blinked at the screen. Bobby Singer. After a moment, she pressed the button to call. The phone rang twice, and then a gruff voice spoke. Yeah, this Bobby? Grace asked. Yup, who's this? Grace Hanadarko. Something wrong? Not sure. I just came from visiting the Roadhouse and having dinner with the Winchesters. Say what now? Grace rolled her eyes. I drove up from Oklahoma, had a very late dinner with the Winchesters. And I'm just passing through Kansas now on my way back home. I see, Bobby said, sounding a little puzzled. Why, may I ask? Gotta go to work tomorrow, Grace said, grinning in amusement because she knew that wasn't what he'd been asking. He spluttered briefly, and she took pity on him. I wanted to see Dean, and so did my friend Retta. So, I missed you, huh? Bobby said. Well, that sucks. I'll be back. Don't you worry, she replied. Now, I got to ask you a question. Fire away. As the guy who took Dean possessed by a demon. Bobby didn't speak for several seconds on the other end of the line. John tell you that? He asked, his tone noncommittal. No, John and Dean didn't tell me anything. Then why do you ask? He kept his tone neutral, though Grace vaguely thought his non-answers were almost as good as an answer. Sam told Retta, she replied. Is he nuts? Was he lying or is it true? Again there was silence on the line. Finally, Bobby cleared his throat. Look, lady, Grace suddenly realized one possible reason for his reticence and interrupted. Maybe I should mention that I've met Castiel, not once but twice, and I know he's an angel. Oh, Bobby sounded startled. That does put a different spin on things. Why are you asking me? John didn't answer his phone. Lucky me. Grace laughed. I get that a lot, she said. So, demon or no demon? How did you come to see Castiel? I'm not getting a straight answer out of you, am I? Bobby chuckled. Seems unlikely, he said. I'm sure you're a nice lady and a hell of a cop, but I've learned a few lessons. How's this? I'll have John call you when he gets up. Sounds good, if it's all I can get. Afraid so, Bobby replied. She disconnected and sat back with a sigh. Who was that? Retta asked. The musketeer we didn't meet, the uncle who's not really their uncle. He called. No, I called him. Retta knit her brows, and Grace shrugged. I wanted to make sure that Sam wasn't off his gourd. He was pretty on it, I'd say, Retta said. Grace shrugged again and flagged down their waitress. Blank, _ blank. Denson sat back to review his notes on the interviews they'd done thus far. Pamela Barnes was a woman with a great deal of confidence and more cynicism. She'd received them reluctantly and without even a vestige of welcome. The dark hair, Ed woman opened the door and looked them up and down. What flavor law enforcement are you two? Melissa raised her eyebrows. I'm Special Agent Haynes and this is Special Agent Denson. We're from the FBI. We have some questions to ask about your part in finding Dean Winchester. Her eyes dark with unspoken emotion, she stepped back. Come on in, she shrugged. Want a beer? No, thank you, Melissa said. Mind if I have one? Of course not. Melissa glanced back at him, a world of comment in her eyes. Denson waited while Melissa encouraged Barnes to settle with her at the kitchen table. Denson wandered around the room, glancing at the counters and the magnets and papers on the fridge. So, Ms. Barnes, please tell me how you got involved in this case, Melissa asked. Barnes glanced at him dubiously, but answered Melissa's question. I went to pay a surprise visit on Bobby, beer in one hand, pork rinds in the other. Imagine my surprise when the house was full up and Bobby was all freaked out about some kid I'd never met. That sounds uncomfortable. I should have left, but Bobby asked me to help out, and I couldn't say no to a friend. So, tell me how you found out what you did, Melissa said. Why? Barnes asked. It's not like you'll believe me on any level. We'd just like to understand how you came to the conclusions you did, Melissa said. Can you explain your process? Barnes glowered at her, and then back at Denson. Fine, I went out, put my hand on the side of the car and opened myself up to the universe. She gazed sardonically at Melissa. Happy, what did the universe tell you? Denson asked, genuinely curious. She looked up at him through narrowed eyes. That Dean Winchester loved that car more than anything in the world besides his family, she said. That he'd made love in that car too many times to count. That he was still alive. And that something seriously crappy had happened to him there. According to the Winchesters, you guided them to Alabama. That was from the dowsing, she said, her eyes snapping slightly. Map dowsing. The pendulum stopped over the state and they headed out. I did second and third readings at Bobby's insistence and narrowed things down. She shrugged. And they found him. After that, Bobby went out to help them keep an eye on Dean and I came home. You didn't want to go meet the man you helped save? Melissa asked. Denson saw the deep discomfort in the woman's eyes as she redirected her attention to his partner. I didn't want anything more to do with it, any of it. What happened there was seriously dark mojo. I helped. I'm glad the kid lived, and I'd be just as happy never to see or hear anything about any of it again. Denson had found that an interesting point of view. He'd gone on to ask her several more questions which she'd answered with more or less candor. A couple of jurisdictions have expressed the hope that you would help them find some of the kill sites or body dumps, Denson observed neutrally. In fact, he knew that some of them had contacted her and gotten nowhere. Didn't you just hear me? She demanded, glaring at him. I don't work with cops. Few real psychics do. It's bad. Enough touching on the crap ordinary people bring in here. Any psychic who voluntarily gets involved with nutjobs and bad guys is a masochist. You get stuff off everyone who comes in here? Melissa asked, sounding as if her curiosity had been piqued. Nearly, Barnes said. Melissa glanced over her shoulder at Denson and said, what about my partner, here? I don't give my insights away, she said. And I don't work for cops. Regardless, she shifted her attention back to Denson. Her brow furrowed as she looked at him, like there was something puzzling her. Raising her chin slightly, she said, give me your hand. Agent, she paused, as if only then realizing that she didn't recall his name. Call me Cal, he said, stepping forward and, after a brief hesitation, letting her take his hand. Her skin was warm and dry, and her eyes went distant. Cal expected to feel silly, to feel the con, but in that moment he felt strangely connected to this vivid woman with her mocking eyes. After several moments, she released him and looked up again, her expression unreadable. Is he going to meet a tall, dark handsome stranger? Melissa asked. With the briefest of jerks, like she'd forgotten Melissa's presence, Barnes shrugged. Already has, she said. So have you. His name is Sam Winchester, and he's due to get taller still. Is that your psychic insight? Melissa asked, a faint hint of sarcasm in her voice. Barnes rolled her eyes. You can tell how big a puppy will grow by looking at his feet, she said. Did you get a look at that boy's feet? Cal chuckled, and put a hand on Melissa's shoulder to keep her from reacting. This may seem an odd question, Ms. Barnes, but what was your impression of the car? It was a car, Barnes said, giving him a puzzled look. What condition was it in? Barnes blinked at him. Exceptional condition, she replied. Dean takes very good care of her, and someone cleaned her within an inch of her life. The evidence left behind was intentional, I'd say. A hint to get John Winchester interested. Something in her expression changed after she said that, and Denson had the distinct impression she'd said more than she'd meant to. She closed her mouth and gave both of them a challenging stare. Anything else? Aren't you going to tell Agent Denson what you saw? Melissa asked. Nothing to tell, Barnes said with a shrug. Unlike you, your partner's not an easy read. Too much ahead of him, too many choices he hasn't made. She gave Denson the eye. I would, however, recommend you take up another line of work. This one will be the death of you. It felt like the pronouncement of a prophet, but Denson shrugged it off. I'm not really interested in beekeeping, he said, and he could tell that while Barnes got his reference, Melissa did not. Interesting. I'm an easy read, Melissa repeated, sounding vaguely offended. Look, kid, it's not meant as an insult. All it means is that you've made your choices and your path is pretty well set. She shrugged. Not that you couldn't be presented with another choice tomorrow that would take you in another direction. I can't see what might come at you from the outside. So, what do you see for me? Melissa asked, and Barnes raised an eyebrow. You sure you want your partner to hear about it? You've kept it pretty close to the vest for a few years now. Denson saw the indecision in Melissa's shoulders and decided to take a hand. I think I'd like a bit of fresh air, he said, and he pulled out his card. If you remember anything or need to tell us something, let me know, he added, handing it to Barnes. She took it with an enigmatic look that he read as disturbed, and then he left the kitchen, glancing around as he left the house. Nothing stood out with special significance there. Was no sign of a crystal ball or tarot cards, and the only table he saw was a heavy round one, a little too solid for the typical medium's trick of lifting it with wires under the arms. He went out, into the front yard and gazed over the wide open space around the house. She didn't farm her land, she didn't have animals, and it looked like all that was ever done to most of it was a good mowing 2 or 3 times a year. He wondered why she lived so far from anyone else, and if it had anything to do with her supposed psychic abilities. If she earned her living at this gig, one would think she'd live a little closer in town. Out here, she'd have to get by on word of mouth. Then he noticed a car parked across the way. A mouse-like woman sat in the front seat, and she looked nervous. He nodded at her, and she started the car up and drove off. Great, said a voice from behind him, and he turned to find Melissa and Barnes coming out of the house. He raised his eyebrows. Melissa looked blank and strained. Barnes just looked irritated, scaring away good customers. It's going to take her another week to get the guts up to come back. I'm sorry, Denson said, and he offered her his hand to shake. She put her hands in her pockets in a casual-seeming gesture that failed entirely to conceal her disinclination to touch him again. Thank you for your help, Ms. Barnes. Her sole response to that was a shrug. And Melissa seemed reluctant to speak, so he nodded and they got back into the bureau car, Melissa behind the wheel as always. Denson glanced aside at her. You okay? Sure, Melissa said in a clipped voice. What did she say that's got you so rattled? Melissa shrugged tensely. She knew something she literally couldn't know. Something I never told anyone ever. And she knew why it matters. She hunched under his silent gaze and shrugged again. It's from a long time ago. At this point it only matters to me. Denson gave her a long look and decided she wasn't going to shar further and contemplated what their next move should be. He still occasionally caught Melissa in an oddly introspective attitude, but he figured she'd either share or she wouldn't. He trusted her implicitly, and didn't think pushing her on something she said wasn't relevant was smart. It was an odd slip Barnes had made, however she'd come up with the idea. She thought this Azazel fellow was taunting John Winchester. On the face of it, that appeared to have been a mistake, but Denson was reasonably certain that the face of this mess was the thinnest of veneers. He still didn't know what to make of the reactions of Jessica Moore or her family, or for that matter, Sam's college friends in general. He and Melissa had dropped by the campus to see if the stories told by the Winchesters, one and all, rang true. Only one person they'd spoken to even admitted to having met Sam's brother, and that was Sam's roommate from the dorms. Yeah, this bow-legged dude showed up just before Sam's party a couple of years back. Grinning like a maniac and congratulating Sam on reaching 20 alive. Brady Holloway shook his head. I thought it was funny, but Sam was totally. Holloway paused. I was going to say pissed. But he wasn't really. He was just non-responsive. Like he just wanted the guy to go away. They talked for a couple of minutes, he joked with me a little, and then, when it got clear that Sam was really freezing him out, he kind of disappeared. Did you know he was Sam's brother? Not a clue. I asked who he was after he left and Sam told me and I was stunned. He seemed a nice enough guy. But Sam didn't want to talk about it, so I never found out why Sam was so weird about him. Then Sam sort of drifted away, hanging with a different crowd. That certainly matched Sam's story. And it painted kind of a bleak picture. None of them admitted to having heard more than the most fleeting reference to Sam's father, and most of his current group of friends had never heard him mention family at all. Universally, they seemed to be startled and taken aback by Sam's sudden departure to look for a brother most of them had never heard of. Jessica Moore's disappearance from Chul seemed to have taken them equally by surprise. The consensus seemed to be that Sam and Jessica were a lock for marriage, kids and the whole 9 yards. They'd had to travel north a couple hundred miles to visit her. And the result of the drive proved disappointing to say the least. William Moore planted himself across the door to his home. No, you can't come in. My daughter doesn't need to be troubled with any nonsense. Denson had let Melissa introduce them, but Moore's hostility made him take the lead. He cleared his throat to let Melissa know he was taking the lead back, then said, Mr. Moore, we just have a few questions for her regarding Sam Winchester, and what's he accused of? Moore demanded. Couldn't you folks have caught him before he ruined my daughter's life? Denson felt Melissa glancing at him. But he didn't return her look. In fact, he kept his expression impassive. He's not accused of anything. Can you be more specific about what you mean? Is your daughter ill? I understand she came home from college unexpectedly. Moore's jaw set. She got together with this boy a year and a half ago, and it's like she fell off the planet. We'd get a few phone calls, a card or two. But she didn't visit once in 18 months. When we went to check up on her, she didn't have time for us. He was clearly laboring under the strain of intense emotions. We didn't know what to do. Then, 2 months ago, she shows up on our doorstep, in tears and refusing flatly to go back to school. She brought all her stuff home, abandoned the apartment she shared with that boy and hid in her room for 2 solid weeks. We tried taking her to a therapist, but she won't go. He shook his head. It's that boy. I don't know what he did to her, but I won't have her troubled with. A tall, blonde girl came around the corner of the house and saw them all on the front steps. She looked pale and thin, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She stopped and stared at the group of them. Dad, what's going on? Jessica, go inside. I don't want. Are they here to see me? She asked. Yes, but, is it about Sam? Why do you ask, Miss Moore? Denson asked, intrigued by her immediate assumption. Not even her father had jumped that quickly to Sam. Because I'm pretty sure his brother got grabbed by that occultist guy, she said with a shrug, but her eyes had a haunted cast. What? Her father exclaimed. What are you talking about? You never said that before. Denson kept quiet, just listening. I didn't really want to think about it, she said. The stuff in the news is pretty horrifying. She turned to Denson. Is it true? Did Dean get grabbed by him? Denson nodded silently, and Jessica's father jumped on it. So he's dead. Jessica flinched. Her father grimaced and put an arm around her shoulders to comfort her. No, he's not, Denson replied. He's the survivor. Moore's eyes widened, but Jessica just nodded slowly, seeming somehow too numb for surprise. Sam and their father found him. Good. Is he okay? Jessica swallowed nervously. Is Sam okay? Dean will recover, and Sam is fine, Denson said. But I have a few questions to ask you if you don't mind. Just to rule a few things out. I don't know anything, Jessica said. I just got home from class, and Sam told me he was leaving with his father to go find his brother. She took a deep breath that seemed wrought with some emotion Denson couldn't identify. She looked up at him. That's all I know. What I want to know is what that boy is going to do about what he did to Jessica, Moore announced suddenly. Dad, stop it, Jessica protested. But without much energy. You don't understand, it's not Sam's fault. What I wanted to ask, Miss Moore, is if you recall getting strange phone calls, hang-ups or crank calls. Or if you remember seeing Sam with anyone you didn't know or who made you uncomfortable. She stared at him, and he didn't know what to make of her expression. No, nothing like that, she said, and he knew she was lying. Sam was perfectly normal. He didn't do anything wrong. Here Denson felt she was telling the truth. She shook her head. I don't know anything that could help you. And I really just don't want to think about it anymore. With that she turned around and went inside, trying to pull her father in with her. He resisted, and she gave up. When the door shut behind her, Moore turned back to glare at Denson. You tell that boy, when you see him, that he ruined her life, and he's going to hell for it. Denson had come out of the interview confident that she'd been hiding something. But unsure whether it was relevant. That kept happening, each person he'd interviewed seemed to have held something back. That was pretty normal, but usually he had some idea of what it was. This felt like quicksilver. He couldn't get hold of it. He needed to find the thread that pulled everything together. Bobby arrived back at the roadhouse just past dawn to find everyone else sleeping the sleep of the just. He let himself in the kitchen door and microwaved a pizza pocket he'd picked up at a convenience store on his way back. Garza was one of the super specialized guys. He mostly dealt with ghouls and zombies. But the luck of the draw had landed him with a banshee this time, and he'd needed some guidance. Bobby had shown him where to look for the information he needed. To lure the spirit to the time and place of his choosing. He just hoped Garza could carry it off. The door opened, and Bobby looked up from where he stood at the counter to see John coming inside. Bobby started to greet him. But John strode over, glaring. Where have you been? He demanded. Bobby blinked at him, startled by the aggressive greeting. Didn't Joe tell you where You need to get your priorities in order, Bobby. John said harshly. You can't just go off like that, not when the boys are so not. To Bobby's shock, John's control seemed to be disintegrating. What if you'd been killed? John asked abruptly. I'm not sure I can. He shook his head and turned his back on Bobby. Damn it. The words seemed to be propelled out of him by intense emotion. Bobby grabbed a bottle, and poured about 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass. He crossed the distance between him and John and thrust the glass into his hands. Drink this. John blinked stupidly at him. What is? Just drink it, John, Bobby growled. Obediently, John downed the alcohol. You okay? Or do you still want to yell at me? I don't know where that came from, John said, wiping his lips with the back of the hand that held the glass. I think it's been building for a while. Ya think? Maybe even since 1983, John muttered. Not since Vietnam, Bobby asked. No, I got all my stuff from Nam out years ago. John grimaced. On Mary, mostly. Ouch, Bobby said. How much of that came out of your surprise visit from the cops last night? The cops, John repeated. Princess Littlefeather called me while I was on my way home. John's eyebrows went up. I almost forgot she was a cop, he said. But you said cops, plural. That friend of hers, she's not a cop, she's a forensic specialist. Doesn't come across the same way at all. John looked thoughtful for a moment, then he and Bobby spoke at the same time. We need to talk about Grace, John said. We gotta talk about Little Feather, Bobby said. They both paused then, staring at each other. You got another one of those? John asked, nodding towards the pizza pocket on Bobby's plate. The microwave beeped and Bobby pulled out the second one. He grabbed a plate and slid the fresh one onto it. Here, let's sit down and eat while we talk about our friend, the cop. John snorted and they went to one of the tables out in the bar. What did you need to tell me? Bobby asked, wondering if it had anything to do with her question. She says she has her very own angel, John replied, and Bobby's eyebrows rose. She's a bit put out, though. Says she didn't get one with a properly angelic name. She's got an angel, like Saz. Not like Saz, actually, but it's why she adjusted so quickly when Saz showed up and tried to smite her. He did what now? Bobby asked. John nodded. Yup, our distinctly unaggressive seeming angel showed up to smite her right after Dean's freak out. He said he was a soldier, Bobby pointed out. John grimaced. Yeah, but I wouldn't have expected him to go after someone like that. But you said she has her own angel. Yeah, name of Earl. Bobby's eyebrows went up. That is not his name. Both Bobby and John turned in surprise to find Castiel standing a few feet away from their table. It's not? John asked reflexively while Bobby just stared at their occasional visitor. It is not. The angel pursed his lips. I believe that Redeemers tend to adjust their names to make them more comfortable for their charges to accept. Redeemers, Bobby repeated, raising his eyebrows. There are two classes of angel that have always been active among humankind, Castiel said. Redeemers and cherubim. What do they do? Bobby asked. The kitchen lights came on and Ellen emerged with a shotgun held at her side. Oh, it's just you, she said, blinking sleepily and putting the gun away behind the bar. Good morning all. Anyone want coffee? I believe that would be most appropriate, Castiel said. Perhaps now would be a good opportunity to continue the conversation that was interrupted by Dean's freak out. Bobby saw that John wasn't pleased by the angel's repeating his own phrasing, so he cut in quickly before John could let him have it. Maybe you could just explain this smiting thing. Did you really go there to smite her? I went there to question her, Castiel said, walking over and pulling out a chair. He sat down. Once I had gotten answers to my questions, I determined that she was not a threat to Dean. And that put smiting off the table? Bobby asked. Castiel's brows knit. Of course. Would for me, Ellen said, setting down a tray on the table. It contained 4 cups of coffee, spoons, a carafe and the sugar and creamer. Help yourselves, gentlemen. Castiel took a cup of coffee and sipped it with a nostalgic look on his face. Ellen once told me that coffee was the beverage of choice for deep conversation. Bobby glanced at Ellen, who shook her head, looking puzzled. In the other timeline, Castiel added, shortly before she died. As a conversation stopper, it couldn't be beat. They all stared silently for a moment. I died? Ellen asked. Castiel nodded solemnly. How did I die? You were in an explosion, Castiel said. Her eyebrows went up. Some terrorist thing? She asked. No, Castiel replied. You set the explosion off yourself. It was meant to be Joe. But she died seconds before it was time. Ellen blinked at him. What the hell was going on? It was an effort to kill Lucifer, Castiel replied. You and Joe were attempting to destroy Hellhounds. To allow Sam and Dean a clear path to him. Did we succeed? You did destroy the Hellhounds, and Sam and Dean did reach Lucifer. He shrugged slightly, a strange, rueful expression on his face. The plan failed. Why? John asked. What caused it to fail? We used the wrong tool, Castiel said. I hope to make it unnecessary, but you should be warned, the cult can't kill Lucifer. Bobby blinked at him. The cult exists. Blank. Dean gradually became aware that he was, in fact, awake. He lay on his side on the bed with an arm thrown over a furry back that he presumed belonged to Lucy and not his brother. The RV was remarkably quiet, and he wondered if his family had actually left him alone for once. Sighing, he rolled onto his back and opened his eyes. Last night had not been restful. Sammy had thrashed repeatedly in his dreams, waking Dean and Lucy both. Sam himself had never actually woken up, of course, and Dean hadn't elected to awaken him. Lucy lifted her head off of Dean's arm and nuzzled his face. Good morning, baby, he said. She licked his nose and then rose, stretching, to her feet on the bed. Bending her head, she nudged at him, and he knew she wanted him to get up. Slave driver, he said. You're as bad as Sammy. Ignoring his protestations, she hopped down from the bed and trotted towards the front of the RV. Dean rose and followed. Before he'd gotten past the bathroom door, Sammy's long legs emerged from under the dining table and his brother got up to let Lucy out for her morning business. Dean ducked into the bathroom take care of his own business before Sammy could insist on checking his bandages. There was something about standing around in the cold with his shirt off while he needed to pee that didn't sit well with him. He considered peeling off his shirt and checking on his own, but decided against it. Dean, you in there? Sam asked. Where else would I be, genius? Dean replied dourly, opening the door. Did you think I'd somehow slipped past you? He followed Sam back into the bedroom and endured the inevitable medical checkup. Then he left Sam remaking the bed and headed back into the main part of the RV. He froze halfway to the door, staring at the pad of paper Sam had left on the table. He was only jarred out of his shock when Sam slipped past behind him to let Lucy back in. You okay, Dean? Dean swallowed hard and took a deep breath. Sure, he said with forced nonchalance. Lucy came up and butted against Dean's knee, and Dean sank down to sit at the table, scratching her head, feeling obscurely reassured by the contact. Where'd this come from? He asked, jutting his chin at the paper and the sketch on it. Sam slid into the other side of the table and shrugged. I drew it, he said. No kidding, you're quite the brain trust this morning, bonehead. He rolled his eyes. Why did you draw it? Where did you see it? Sam shrugged. It was in my dream last night, he said, and Dean sensed the same sort of forced calm he himself was projecting. He realized that the irritating density Sam had displayed had an underlying cause, some worry that he wasn't sharing. Dean leaned forward. What dream? He asked. Just a dream, Sam said, his tone now growing tense. Why, what of it? I know the tree, Sammy, Dean said, reaching out towards it but not quite touching it. Where's Dad's journal? Sam stood up and reached into one of the overhead compartments and pulled the battered thing out. Dean grabbed it and started leafing through. He stopped when he found what he wanted and turned it to face Sammy. There, see, quote. Sam blinked. Yeah, I do. That house was in the dream, too. Where is it? Imagine you dredging that up, Dean said, shaking his head, concealing his own growing unease. That's our house, Sammy, where we lived before. You haven't seen it since you were about 6 months old. Not since, he trailed off and had to take a fortifying breath to continue. Not since Mom died. Sam's jaw dropped as Dean spoke. That's the house in Lawrence. Why would I be dreaming about that? How the heck do you remember it is a better question, Dean retorted. I mean, well enough to draw so that I recognized it. Dude, an odd expression came over Sam's face, and he shook his head. I need to talk to Dad. Dean shrugged, not sure where all the rents he was getting from Sam were coming from. I'm guessing he's inside. Sam nodded once, a sharp, anxious movement. Well, since that's also where the eggs and stuff are, I vote we go in. Right, Sam got up, suddenly all business. As if to hide whatever mood it was he'd been thrown into by Dean's revelation. Where's your coat? I can walk 10 feet through the. Sam held the coat out with the arms ready for Dean to thread himself into. Before long, Dean was going to have to rearrange everyone's thinking. For now, he just shrugged into the coat and went with Sam and Lucy across the snowy yard. Inside, they found a meeting breaking up. Bobby, Ellen and Dad were getting up from a table with coffee cups in hand. Castiel had left his on the table. Dean felt a stab of exclusion that he tried to suppress. The angel walked over to him. We must talk soon, he said, his intense blue eyes capturing Dean's attention fully. I believe there are some things your father wishes to tell you first. He pulled something out of his pocket and held it out. Dean took it automatically, and then the angel was gone. He looked down and saw that it was one of his audio tapes. The label was discolored slightly, but it looked otherwise unhurt, and the handwritten word could still be read. Metallica, did an angel just give you a cassette tape? Ellen asked, and Dean looked up to find her at his elbow. He nodded mutely. She just shook her head and put an arm around his shoulders. Let's get you some breakfast. Dean glanced at his father, and John nodded. We'll talk later, dude, he said. Sam was waiting beside him impatiently, and Dean decided not to test his patience any further. Eggs? He asked hopefully. I think that can be arranged. Sam waited for Dean to be out of range before he spoke. Dad, I have to talk to you. He could see his father's expression and knew he was going to ask if it could wait. It's urgent, he said quickly, to forestall him. What is it? Dad asked, his attention elsewhere. Bobby lingered, but Sam didn't mind. He just waited a second to make sure Dean was out of range and then said, I had a dream last night that felt real, like the ones from before. John and Bobby both glanced at the kitchen door and then turned back to Sam. About Dean? John asked. No, about some woman and her kids, and their house. It didn't seem to make much sense until Dean saw the sketch I'd made of the tree in their front yard. He pulled the pad out of his jacket pocket and showed it to them. It meant nothing to Bobby, that much was clear. Dad, though, Dad's jaw dropped. Dean dug a picture of the house in Lawrence out of your journal and it was the house I'd dreamed about. That couldn't it just be a holdover from? Sam shook his head. I don't think so. I think that woman and her kids are in danger. I saw fire and destruction. He shivered. It felt like the ones about Dean. Are you saying that this is the house you used to live in? Bobby demanded. John nodded. It's the house where Mary died. We have to do something, Dad. I didn't do anything about the first dreams about Dean, and look what happened. We can't. Someone has to help her. Sam saw his eyes go distant, and he knew that his father was trying to think who to send the hunt to. We have to help her, Dad, he said. You want to go? Dad asked, sounding startled. Sam's immediate impulse was to say sure, but then he shook his head. I can't leave Dean. John heaved a sigh and nodded. Maybe I can find someone else. How would we explain how we know about the hunt, Dad? Sam asked. Unless you want to tell the whole hunting community, thanks for ever mentioning that to us, by the way, that I have strange powers that might just come from a demon, We have no evidence whatsoever that anything's even happening. Dad grimaced. You're right. I don't like it, but you're right. I'll have to go to Lawrence. I could tag along, Bobby suggested. Dad shook his head urgently. No, Bobby, if I'm going, I need you to stay here. I don't want to leave the boys alone. They wouldn't be alone, John, Bobby protested. There's Ellen and Joe, and a good 10 or 15 hunters every night. And it's not like I'm useless, Sam pointed out, feeling a bit disregarded. I'm sorry, Sam, you haven't been hunting in years. Ellen's not a hunter, Joe's just a kid with no training. And I don't trust any of these hunters. He shrugged. Hell, I don't even trust Joe. I don't really know her as an adult. Thanks, Joe said from the other side of the bar, and they all looked over in surprise. What's up? Quote, nothing, Dad replied instantly. Joe rolled her eyes and shrugged. Right, whatever, I just thought you'd want to know, Jim Murphy's here. He's in the kitchen talking to Mom and Dean. Sam turned to stare at her. What's he doing here? I guess John told him to come, Joe replied with a shrug. At least, that's what he said. Sam turned back to Dad. Why didn't you tell us he was coming? His father's face was blank. I guess I forgot, what with Grace showing up last night and Castiel showing up this morning, and then this hunt. Sam nodded. We'll finish this conversation later, he said. And he hurried into the kitchen to greet Pastor Jim. Blank. Kind of an odd situation, don't you think? Bobby said as he and John followed Sam at a more sedate pace. John glared at him, wondering what he meant. What are you talking about? Sam found a hunt. He wants you to go and leave them behind. You don't want to. Kind of a reverse on the usual order of things, eh? Then, taking advantage of John's total crogglement, Bobby walked off chuckling. In the kitchen, there was a reunion of sorts going on. John didn't know how long it had been since Dean saw Jim, but it had been at least 5 years for Sammy. Jim managed to be tactful about Jessica, mostly by avoiding the subject of Sam's years at college altogether. After a while, Sam seemed to grow thoughtful and silent. When it came time to take Lucy outside for her business, Sam offered to take her so that Dean could keep talking to Jim. As he left, he gave John a look that needed no interpretation. Sammy probably thought he was being subtle, but that kid's idea of subtlety had more in common with skywriting than, say, love notes stuck through the vents of a girl's locker. John got up, ignoring Dean's eyes on him as he went. Sam was standing near the corner of the lot that had been identified as the official doggy dump place as Dean called it. Yeah, Sam, Dad, do you think Pastor Jim would go with you to Lawrence? John shook his head. He needs to go back to his church, Sam. Look, the more I think about it, the less I like you going there alone. And haven't you known him almost since the beginning? John grimaced. Not almost. He has his own work, Sammy. I can't ask him to drop his congregation to babysit me on a hunt. It's not babysitting, Dad, his son protested. You need someone to have your back, especially in Lawrence, where crazy memories are bound to ambush you. Cut the psychobabble, John growled irritably. Come on, Lucy, he called, and they went back in. He considered the issue closed, but he reckoned without his younger son's similarities to his mother. During the general conversation at lunch, there came a lull. Sam took ruthless and unfair advantage of. Pastor Jim, I've found a hunt that Dad's going to be leaving on soon. I wondered if you'd be able to go along and back him up. John glared. Sam, I said I didn't. He broke off though, when Dean spoke. What hunt? He asked. Dad needs to go to Lawrence, Sam said. There's a hunt at our old house. Dad, you can't go there alone, Dean said earnestly. You can't. That's nuts. It's not a problem, John said, glaring daggers at Sam. Dad, we once drove 60 miles out of our way to avoid going through Lawrence. As John remembered it, that was to avoid freaking Dean out unnecessarily, but he didn't say so, not in the face of Dean's earnest worry. Don't tell me you can go back, just like that, without any problems. I agree, Jim Murphy said unexpectedly. Of all people, I know how hard you'll find it to go back to Lawrence. John gazed at him for a short moment, then lowered his eyes. He couldn't reject Jim's concern as readily as he could reject Sam's. John, Jim said, and John looked up again. I'll come. John shook his head. You have your congregation to think of, work too. Jim shrugged and cut in on John's objections. Urgent family business just came up. They'll understand. A strange sense of relief came over John, and he realized just how much he'd been dreading going to Lawrence by himself. He nodded without speaking, and the tension that had enveloped the table eased somewhat. Even Bobby seemed relieved. So, what's this hunt? Dean asked, gazing anxiously at Sam. When did you start looking for hunts? I didn't, I stumbled onto this one. Quote, stumbled how? Dean asked. Sam looked mildly panicked, and John couldn't help feeling that it served him right, pushing this way. He shoved that thought aside as unworthy and shook his head. Sam's developed an unusual talent, Dean. Sam cleared his throat. Dad, if you and Pastor Jim are going to Lawrence, shouldn't you leave pretty soon? There's some urgency involved. Dean watched anxiously while Sam chivied them to get ready, then went with Ellen to get them a lunch ready for the road. While his eldest son was out of earshot, John grabbed Sam. Why didn't you let me tell him? Because I'd rather tell him my own way, Sam said quietly. You can explain it all to Pastor Jim on the road. You don't have to call me that anymore, Sam, Jim said with an amused smile. I always figured that was just you boys being polite to my gray hairs. Sam blinked at him. I'm not sure I do. You mind me calling you that? No, it's fine, Jim said with a grin. I just didn't want you to feel obligated. Dean and Ellen emerged with a packed paper bag, and John set off with Jim in the truck. He felt harried and uncertain, and he didn't quite know how Sam was planning to explain things to Dean. He just had to count on Bobby to keep them from flying apart. And he had another person to tell the tale to. He cleared his throat and started in. Blank. Dean watched Sam hustle Dad and Pastor Jim out onto the road and couldn't figure out which way was up and whether the earth went around the sun or the sun went around the moon. Sammy telling Dad what to do, and Dad doing it, rocked his world. After they were gone, Sam walked up and stood next to Dean, sort of bouncing up and down with anxiety. Let's go back to the RV. I need to tell you something. Dean gazed distrustfully up at his brother. What's up, Sasquatch? I've grabbed us some beers and some pork rinds and a bunch of pizza poppers. I thought we could. Dude, are you dying? Am I dying? Nobody's dying, Sam protested, pulling Dean on towards the RV. Dean shook his head. I am dying. That's why I have an angel, isn't it? He's supposed to guide me on to heaven. No, Dean, you're not dying, and Castiel isn't a reaper. How do you know? Because reapers can't be seen by people. They can be seen by people who are dying. By that logic, everyone here is imminently dying except Joe, because everyone else has seen Saws. Oh my God, Dean exclaimed. She'll go to the store one day and there'll be an explosion or a fire or a rampaging herd of wild elephants. And we'll all be dead when she comes back. Up till he mentioned the elephants, Sam had been looking increasingly alarmed. He rolled his eyes as Dean finished up. You threw, or it could be piranhas. Nobody's dying and Saws is not a reaper. How do you know? Have you ever met a reaper? I haven't died, Dean, so no. Then you can't know for sure. I am not a reaper, came the voice from behind them. Dean felt a grin spread across his face as he turned to face the angel. Hey, Saws. Hey, Dean, Castiel said, his tone a little off, but his eyes warm. How are you feeling? Dean shrugged. Fingers and toes, man, fingers and toes. Castiel stared at him for a moment, then turned to Sam. Has he lost feeling in other parts of his body? No, that's just my fam. Eileen's standard non-answer to that question. How do I feel? With my fingers. He wiggled his fingers and the angel nodded slowly. He learned it from Dad. No idea where Dad got it from. I see. Castiel gazed at Sam for a long moment. Then shook his head. It doesn't matter. So, what brings you here? Apart from telling us you're not a Reaper. I wanted to check on you, Castiel said with a faint smile, and Dean grinned back at him. Castiel blinked. Oh, and I brought you this. He held out a paper grocery bag that Dean hadn't really noticed. It did seem kind of weird for an angel to be carrying groceries. Dean took the bag and looked inside. Dude, he exclaimed, more of my stuff. Blank, underscore, blank. Sam guided Dean into the RV, where it was warm and he could sit down. And stepped back outside taking hold of Castiel's arm. The angel looked at him curiously. Can I talk to you for a minute? Of course, Sam, Castiel said, allowing Sam to draw him away. Is something wrong? He glanced over at Dean through the door into the RV. I need to tell Dean about my dreams. Is there any chance you could stick around, in case he gets you stopped him when he started to run away that one time. You wish me to stay nearby so that I can prevent him from either leaving or harming himself? Castiel asked, tilting his head slightly in a way that put Sam in mind of a bird. He tore himself away from that fanciful thought and said, exactly. Is that something you could do? What is it you're going to tell Dean? About my dreams, about me dreaming about him. You intend to reveal your psychic ability to him? Castiel gazed at him solemnly, and Sam nodded. You do this despite the fact that your father does not wish him to know. He started to tell him this morning, and something happened today that would be hard to explain without telling him about it, and I think if I tell him I'm psychic but don't tell him about the dreams now, it would be impossible to tell him later. Sam grimaced. It's one thing to keep it from him when he's sick, I think he'll understand that, but to go halfway and stop, I think it could be bad. Castiel was nodding. I agree, he said. Too many secrets can lead only to grief. The tone of his voice, the way he leaned slightly forward as he spoke, the intent expression of his eyes all gave Sam the oddest impression that he was saying this out of a deeply grained conviction. He glanced into the RV again to see that Dean was stripping out of the shirt he'd been wearing to pull on a Led Zeppelin t-shirt from the bag. He looked back at Castiel. You say that like you know it, not like it's an opinion, even a strongly held opinion. He shook his head. Do you know it? I mean, you're an angel. You know things we don't. Castiel's eyes were grave. I do. Can you tell us? Sam gazed at the angel, then shrugged ruefully. Is it a secret? Castiel shook his head. I have already spoken to your father. But it is a complicated matter. I do not believe that Dean is ready to hear about it. Can we talk later then? Dean's bound to take a nap. After a pause for reflection, Castiel nodded. If not today, then soon. Dean leaned out the door of the motor home. Hey, Sam, I think the pizza pockets are burning. Sam turned sharply. Shit. He hurried inside. He grabbed the oven mitts and opened the tiny oven. Behind him, Castiel was asking for an explanation of pizza pockets. Dean said, it's like they took the crust and wrapped it around little bite-sized pieces of the pizza. You should try one. Sam turned around with the pan straight from the oven, preparing to dump them onto some paper towels to cool and degrease. Castiel reached out and took one right off the pan and popped it into his mouth. Hey, Sam exclaimed. Dude, you'll burn yourself. Castiel chewed and swallowed, blinking. They do seem to be somewhat damaging. I do not see the appeal. Sam snorted, dumping the rest of them off the tray. You're supposed to let them cool first, he said. They taste better when you don't burn the skin off your tongue with melted cheese. Sissies wait for them to cool, Dean opined. Sam pulled them back out of his brother's reach. You're waiting till they've cooled, he ordered. Well, I'm a sissy, Dean said flatly. No, you've got a brain, or at least a brother with a brain. So, what is it you've got to tell me that requires beer and junk food? Sam opened the fridge and pulled out 3 beers. He opened one, handed it to Dean, offered the second to Castiel. The angel took it and Sam opened the third. He sat down and took a swallow, not sure how to get started now that the time had come. Maybe he should have let Dad tell him. Blank, underscore, blank. Dean looked up at his little brother. He looked weird, freaked out, like he didn't know what to say. With Sammy, that was bizarre. He always had something to say. Is this about how you know there's a hunt? Sam nodded. Yeah, it is, he said, and he took another drink of beer, not looking Dean in the eye. Why were you drawing that tree this morning? Looking into his beer bottle, Sam said. Because I dreamed about it last night. He looked up. Dean, weird as this has got to sound, it turns out I'm psychic. Dean stared at him. Nobody spoke for a long moment while Sam and Castiel gazed back him. Dean cleared his throat. Okay, I'm waiting for the punchline. I do not believe it is a joke, Castiel said. He looked over at Sam. My grasp of humor is occasionally vague, however. No, it's not a joke, Sam replied. Sounding upset. Dean, he took another solid pull on his beer. I have prophetic dreams, sometimes, about some things, and Dad buys this. We had fairly spectacular proof, Sam replied. His face contorting into a grimace or a scowl, or first one and then the other. Dean had a profound sense that he might not want to know more about this, but he asked the question anyway. What proof? Sam bit his lip and looked out the window of the RV over the prairie beyond the parking lot of the roadhouse. Last August the first started having these really freaky dreams. I thought they were stress dreams. I'd just finished school, I was getting ready for the LSAT, and they were about you. Dean blinked at him. I'm taking it they weren't about what a totally awesome brother I am. Sam chuckled without humor. I wish. I just took them for a reaction to change. I'd graduated college, and you'd proved you could do it without us, Dean said, and Sam flushed. When had his brother gotten so perceptive? I was there, at your graduation. Sam's head came up and he stared at Dean with wide eyes. You were. How? I got a girl whose sister was graduating to take me with her. He said, and Sam laughed. She didn't figure out why until you started giving that speech and I got all well, I was paying attention. I really hadn't been before. Wow, Sam said. I wasn't actually done, yet. I had 2 more classes to go that I finished in the summer. He shrugged. Jess really wanted. No one seemed to want to break the silence that fell when Sam cut himself off. Finally, Dean cleared his throat. So, these stress dreams, I take it they're important. Sam nodded. So, great guru, tell us about your dreams. Sam's Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed. He kept his eyes about 6 inches below Dean's when he answered. They were about you being tortured by a guy who looked a hell of a lot like Jeff Bridges. It felt as if he'd been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. What? I didn't know they were anything more than stress dreams, Dean. I thought I didn't know they were real. Dean blinked at him. Duh, I mean, who would? Jeff Bridges. You had to have been hitting the Jell-O shots a little hard. Sam shook his head. Dean, I'm serious. Dean didn't want to think about it. He sought for a different subject. So, what about this hunt? I'm getting to that. What is it? I don't know, I just know there's a threat to the people who are living in our house now. Sam ran his fingers through his hair, clearly frustrated. Dean, don't you understand? I'm psychic. I had dreams about you. And I never did anything about it. What would you have done? Dean asked. Called me up after 2 years of not talking to me and said, hey, Dean. I'm having bad dreams starring you. Like you would ever have called for something like that, like I would have ever believed in them. Jeff Bridges. I would have laughed at you. He knew that he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have believed it, but he wouldn't have laughed either. He might even have gone to see his brother, and that would have brought the demon closer to Sammy. It wasn't until I got to the house in Graysville, where he'd been keeping you, and recognized the room from my dream that I realized that they were real. Sam's voice droned as the background to Dean's horror. Sammy had seen things. He had seen what happened to him. He knew. Blank. So when Sam broke off when Castiel put a hand on his shoulder. He isn't hearing you, the angel said softly. Sam glanced up at Saz and then looked more closely at Dean. His brother's eyes were glazed with some kind of thought, his expression blank. They put Deanji to bed and Sam turned to find that the angel had gone. Again, Lucy hopped up onto the bed beside Dean and rested her head on his shoulder. At Jim's request, John started from the beginning, defined. As the moment he'd realized Dean was missing, and told him the whole story in order. The minister listened without interrupting. Once he'd finished, Jim sat silent for a long minute. No questions? John asked finally. Thousands, Jim said with a rueful smile. With both you and Bobby involved, I trust both boys have been tested for demonic influences. Of course, Jim, John said. Jim nodded. You really believe that man? That Castiel is an angel? God help me, but I do. John's phone rang, and he grabbed it, half expecting either Sam or Dean. He didn't recognize the number, however. Briefly, he considered not answering. Then he sighed and flipped it open. "Hello, Mr. Winchester." It was a timid female voice, very quiet. "Is this sir, is that you?" "This is John Winchester. Who is Miss Moore?" "Yes." Her voice got a little louder. You said if I needed something and didn't feel comfortable calling Sam that I should call you." He really hadn't expected her to call. But he nodded and pulled over to the side of the road. "Yes, of course. Has something happened?" "Nothing, not like you probably think. My father he wants me to see a therapist, but I'm afraid to go talk to someone because I can't tell them what really happened." "I understand. What do you want from me?" "Do you know your reputation? I remember a lot of its thoughts, and it knew a lot about you. Do you know anyone I could talk to? Someone who could help me get someone who would know what was real and what wasn't?" John blinked at the road ahead of them. "I think I might be able to help. Can you give me just a second?" "Okay, but I don't want anyone to. My dad thinks Sam is evil incarnate." She let out a mildly hysterical sounding giggle. John grimaced. "Okay, Jessica, 1 second. He muted his phone and turned to Jim. "This is the girl. Sam was the girl the demon possessed. Her father's insisting on counseling, but she'd like to find someone who won't start out King. She's crazy for saying she was possessed, but who will still pass muster for her parents." "Fussy," Jim said. "Where does she live?" "San Francisco Bay Area, California." "Find out what denomination she is," Jim said, flipping open his own journal. "And that's a big area." John got back on the phone. "What religious persuasion are you?" "Dad's Episcopalian, Mom's Methodist." John passed that on, and Jim reached down for his journal. "Let me talk to her." John put the phone back to his ear. "Jessica, I'm going to hand you over to a friend of mine. His name is Jim Murphy, and he's like you," she said, interrupting. "Go ahead." John passed the phone over and got back out on the road. "Hello, Jessica, this is Jim." The preacher listened for a moment. "I've got a phone number for you, can you write it down?" He passed on the phone number, then said, "That's for an Episcopalian minister named Reginald Pierce." John listened just enough to know that Jim was handling things well enough. He made a second call. To that Reverend Pierce. Finally, he finished with the phone calls and gave John back his phone. "That's settled. You found her someone. Just so happens her father knows the fellow I'm sending her to. Knows and likes him. That will make things enormously easier for her." "That's lucky. She says the FBI has been to see her." "Fabulous. She say what she told them?" "She told me the agent she spoke to wanted to know if she'd seen anyone with Sam that made her uncomfortable, or if there were a lot of crank calls. She said she told him no, that Sam hadn't done anything. And that the first she'd known something was wrong was when she came home and Sam told her he was leaving to look for his brother." John nodded slowly. "That's good. That's all true as far as it goes." "Well, I wanted to." John's phone rang again. He picked it up with a muffled curse and flipped it open. "Yeah, don't any of you people return phone calls?" demanded a voice he recognized. "I didn't know you'd called," he said. "Bobby didn't tell you?" she asked, sounding irritated. He suppressed some irritation of his own. "No, we had kind of an exciting morning. Is there something I can do for you, Detective Hanadarko?" "I'm driving." Beside him, Jim gave him a double take. "Sam told Retta that it was a demon that attacked Dean." "What about it?" "So it's true?" "Yeah, it's true." She didn't say anything else for a long moment, and John sighed. "You still there? Demons are real." "Yes, demons are real." "What did you call me for?" "I don't know, confirmation." "Go to church." "I may just," she muttered. "I'm hanging up now. That breaks my heart." John pressed end and dropped the phone on the seat beside him. "Detective," Jim ventured after a moment. "One of Dean's pickups," John replied grimly. One who remembered him fondly enough that when the case crossed her desk, she was immediately kicked off it because of the conflict of interest. "Wow, and you told her about demons?" "No," John sighed. "She drove up from Oklahoma, with her best friend, and they showed up at the roadhouse last night. That must have been a bit unexpected. She'd called already at that point and talked to him." John shook his head. "Hell, this is insane." He cleared his throat, ready for another story, one with more angels and gunfire. "What?" John rolled his eyes. "Another tale to tell. Blank, underscore, blank." Johnny saw Jason and Leanne out of his office and glanced at his secretary. Rose looked irritated, and he raised his eyebrow. She nodded towards a chai. That was out of his line of sight and he stepped further out of his office. Sighing, he said, "Come on in, Grace." His wayward sister hopped up out of the chair and walked right past him into his office. He followed her and wondered what was up. She never, ever came to the church if she could help it, and she seemed unusually fidgety. "Have a seat, Grace," he said. She sat down for about a second, or maybe two, then she was up again. Pacing, Johnny walked around and sat down behind his desk, watching her in concern. He was about to ask her what was going on when she suddenly spoke. "Johnny, do you have a little time today?" He got the sense that she was asking for more than 5 minutes and he nodded. Grace might be frustrating and difficult at the best of times, but he hadn't often seen her like this. He cleared his throat. "I don't have any other scheduled appointments, and I took confessions this morning." Johnny gazed her uncertainly. "Is something wrong, Grace?" "Wrong, yeah, there's a lot of things wrong." She shook her head and turned to face him. "Johnny, I've had a religious epiphany." Johnny stared at her dubiously. "Okay, no, seriously, this whole good and evil thing. I want in." He had no idea where this was coming from. "Grace, I haven't had my coffee yet. I'm not really up to your sense of humor." Grace stopped her pacing abruptly and leaned over his desk at him. "I'm not being funny, Johnny," she retorted, her eyes narrowing. "I mean, I know I already kind of work on the side of good, or whatever, but I want to do more. I want to help." Johnny felt like he'd lost his way in this conversation. "Help how?" he asked. "Help who?" "People. You know, the war effort." Either this was one of Grace's more outre practical jokes, or she was serious, and Johnny was afraid she was serious. "What war effort?" She shrugged. "Demons, angels, good versus evil." Her eyes met his. "Come on, Johnny, you're a priest, you have to know about it." Grace was gifted at pulling a scam, but not this gifted. Johnny shook his head. "What are you on?" he asked helplessly. Eyes narrowed to slits, his sister glared at him. "I'm not on anything but cheap linoleum," she replied angrily. Johnny's eyes dropped reflexively to the floor, and he forced them back to her face. "Grace, what are you talking about?" Her shoulders slumped and her head dropped. Heaving a deep sigh, she looked at him again. "I know you believe in good and evil," Grace said. Here he was on firm ground. "Yes, of course I do." "Do you believe in demons and angels?" she asked. Johnny didn't know where this was leading. This sounded more like a lead into one of her obnoxious punchlines. "Doctrine tells us there are such beings," he agreed reluctantly. Grace threw herself down in the chair across from him, her eyes roaming the office as she spoke. "You've read in the paper that a serial killer was here for a while, using an abandoned office complex as headquarters." "That occultist guy," Johnny said, nodding. That was a disturbing case. He'd wondered if Grace had been involved in the investigation, but she never welcomed questions about her work. "Right." Grace pursed her lips, then leaned forward again, her eyes grabbing his. "I know one of the victims." "You knew one of them?" Johnny exclaimed, horrified. "Grace, that's..." Grace rolled her eyes. "No, Johnny, not new." He stared at her, not sure if he was understanding her correctly. "I know the survivor. That Dean Winchester fellow." He'd been praying for the man ever since he'd heard of him, even before he'd known the poor man's name. Grace nodded thoughtfully. "In fact, you know him, too, or you met him." She dug in her pocket and pulled out a creased piece of paper. "Here, look." Johnny took it and stared at the grinning face for several seconds. He did remember the boy, but it had to have been years and years back. "Good Lord," he murmured. "I did meet him, just the once." "Yeah, well, I spent a weekend with him," Grace said. And Johnny looked up at her from the photograph to find that her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "It was fun," she gulped. "What that guy did to him, I'd say you should see it, but you really shouldn't." Johnny got up and walked around the desk, sitting in the chair next to hers. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Grace, that has to be really hard to deal with," he said gently. "I can't imagine how that feels." "Yeah, you can," Grace said, knocking his hand away. "It sucks ass." Johnny didn't move away, but he wasn't surprised by her rejection of his sympathy. She looked up after a second, though, her eyes wet. Ignoring the tears, almost daring him to notice them, she said, "Thing is, what did it to him wasn't the guy they're chasing. I mean, it was him, sort of, but the dentist from Illinois had nothing to do with it." "What are you talking about?" "He's possessed, Johnny," Grace said with exaggerated patience. "You know how that works. The demon did it, the dentist is just along for the ride." Now she sounded not distraught but disturbed. What dentist? He demanded in frustration. Grace sighed. The prime suspect in the case is a dentist from Illinois that looks like Jeff Bridges. At Johnny's incredulous look she rolled her eyes. Seriously, that's the description they have on the bolo. Is there a picture? She nodded. Yeah, a driver's license photo. He really does look like Jeff Bridges. She pursed her lips thoughtfully. Maybe not quite as handsome, but definitely a similar look. She shook her head. That's not the point. The dentist is possessed. Johnny finally realized what was going on in her head. It surprised him, because she'd never been one to go this route, but knowing the kid, having spent time with him, could make a huge difference to her perception of his attacker. Grace, I know that it's easier, when you look at what people sometimes do to each other, to believe that it's demonic influence rather than. Grace made an impatient noise that cut him off. Not for me, Johnny, she said scathingly. When has that ever been easier for me? Johnny blinked at her. You make a valid point, but this is pretty out there, especially for you. He dared to put his hand on her knee. I do you the credit of not thinking you're using your friend's trauma as an opportunity to play a practical joke on me. Grace stared at him for a long moment, then snorted. Well, at least you're not completely blowing me off about it, like you did about the angel. Johnny rolled his eyes, and Grace laughed ironically. Kind of funny. My priest brought her buys it when I say I believe in demons, but not when I said I believe in angels. Johnny shook his head at her. Grace, you make fun of all aspects of religion, then you tell me you've met an angel. What did you think I was going to say? Well, whatever you think, it wasn't bullshit. I had met an angel, and now I've met two. She snorted. Hell, I shot one of them. Johnny stared at her in awe. Because that sounded frankly megalomaniacal. It didn't hurt him, Grace said as if that made the claim any less insane. Grace, are you seriously expecting me to believe this? Angels, demons, why are you so sure it's a demon? Because Dean told me, Grace said. You've seen him, Dean. Retta and I drove over yesterday, had a very late dinner and came back. Over where? Johnny asked. Nebraska. The opposite fucking corner of Nebraska, in fact. A shithole little town. He's staying at a bar. Dean is. Well, him and his family, she amended. Why would a man who's been through a trauma, like he's been through, be staying at a bar? He shook his head. That's crazy, Grace. People don't stay at bars. They do when they're friends with the owners and the owners live above the bar. Johnny glowered at her. So what you're telling me is that he's staying at a house that happens to be attached to a bar. Semantics, Grace scoffed. So, Dean, a young man who has been badly traumatized. Dean, who is undoubtedly in a somewhat tenuous emotional state, told you that a demon attacked him, and you believed it. Grace scowled. Actually, no, she sighed. Dean just told me to stay away from the bastard. Sam told Retta. Retta told me and John confirmed it. Johnny stared at her. He wondered if there was something wrong with him, because that actually sounded moderately convincing. Except, who are Sam and John? Sam is Dean's baby brother. He'll be challenging firefighter brother for height before long. John is Dean's dad. Why did they make you their confidant? He fully expected her to be at least mildly offended by his skepticism on that point, but she just grinned. Sam told Retta, she repeated. And who doesn't tell Mama Retta their life story? She shrugged. Besides, I'd already told them about Earl. Johnny raised his eyebrows. My angel, she clarified. Why would you tell them about your angel? Johnny asked, wondering if these Winchester people now viewed his sister as insane. Because I'd already met Saws at that point, and it was the easiest way to convince John that I already knew about angels, and it sure riveted his attention. Saws. Dean's angel. His name is Castiel, but Dean calls him Saws. She shook her head. And I gotta tell you, it pisses me off. Dean's angel has a properly angelic sounding name. Sounds almost like music or something. Castiel. I get Earl. Not that Earl isn't cool, he is. Castiel just has a more euphonious sound. A salacious grin curved her mouth. And he has an awesome six-pack. Why on earth would you see an angel's six-pack? Johnny demanded, caught up in the story despite his incredulity. An awful thought occurred to him. Was he naked? No, he was wearing a trench coat. Like a flasher? No. Grace gave him an exasperated look. He was dressed like an office drone. Then how? Oh, Dean ripped his clothes off. Grace, are you trying to make me think? Put a sock in it, Johnny. I had just told Dean I'd shot Saws. He freaked, yelled the angel's name, the angel appeared, which is a trick Earl could stand to learn. She glanced around the room as if looking for something, then shrugged. And when Dean saw him, He started dragging his shirt up to look for scars or whatever. When you say, appeared, do you mean out of thin air? And when he left, I heard the sound of wings. Grace, you're scaring me. Grace stared at him. Fine, never mind. I thought I could get help from you on a religious matter, but I guess I was hoping for too much. Grace, what is it you want from me? Help protecting myself from demons. I've been involved in the investigation of this case, I'm acquainted with the single victim the demon kept alive, and I'm reliably informed that this all could put me on the bastard's radar. I don't know a lot about demonology, Grace, Johnny said. Great, my brother the father doesn't know a damn thing about demons. She started out of the office. Wait, Johnny exclaimed. He grabbed a pint of holy water from a nearby cabinet. Here, take this. She took it, looking at it bemusedly. I'll make a call to a man I know who does know a thing or two about demons. Thanks, then, she said. I'm headed out to get a drink. If he tells you anything useful, join me there. All right, Johnny said. All right, blank, underscore, blank. Apparently, he went there to smite her. John said, not sure why. I think it might be because he didn't really understand what was going on. I do know she shot him. The cop shot the angel. UK. Now what the oddest thing about that question is? John asked, and Jim shook his head. That it's not the weirdest thing I've heard anyone say lately. Jim snorted. What did he? The other man broke off at the sound of a cell phone. John grabbed his phone, but it was inactive. Not me. No, it's me, Jim said as he flipped his phone open. Hello. John didn't really listen till he heard a startling comment. Actually, I'm sitting right now in a car with John Winchester, so I'm quite familiar with the family, and am moderately familiar with the situation. What on earth? John exclaimed. Jim turned towards him. John, I think you'd better pull over. Why? Just do it, John, Jim snapped, and John found a clearing in the traffic and made his way to the edge of the road. No, Johnny, I was talking. I call you Johnny and him John. That should be clear enough. Who is he? John demanded. This Johnny. He's a priest I met at an interfaith conference, Jim said in a quiet voice. Now, Johnny, what are you talking about? Johnny grimaced. I told you my sister says she knows the surviving victim. Did you say John Winchester? Yes, said the voice on the telephone. The boy's father. Dean's father, yes, Jim said. I've known John for more than 20 years, and I've known his boys nearly as long. You say your sister knows Dean? She says she saw him yesterday. She saw him yesterday. Johnny knew he was repeating his words for the benefit of the man in the car with him, but it was getting irritating. Look, she's asking me for help protecting herself from demons. I don't know how much credence to put in her fears, but she's never asked for anything like this before. Mostly she rejects God and all his works, so I really don't want to put her off. Did she give you a reason why she thinks she needs protection? He heard a deep voice in the background and Jim speaking more quietly, clearly to the other man. From demons, John, hush. Well, she says, and she said your friend there confirmed it. That Dean was attacked by a demon. There was silence for a moment, then Jim spoke to his companion. You confirmed a demon attack over the phone. Well, what was I supposed to do? Said the distant voice of John Winchester. It's not like I hadn't already met the girl, and she claims to have her own angel or, no, Saz confirmed it. Johnny cleared his throat. Did he just say that? Cass has confirmed that Grace has her own angel. Yes, Jim said. So, your sister is Detective Grace Hanadarko. She is, Johnny said, his heart sinking. So some portion of her crazy story was true. Jim, what's going on here? Some of what the church has always taught us is true, Johnny, Jim said reluctantly. Look, I really don't like talking about this on cell phone, but your sister may very well be in danger. Demons. You've got to mean demons, because I don't remember the church teaching anything about angels in trench coats. The angel wears a trench coat. Before Johnny could formulate an answer, he heard John Winchester. Yeah, but I don't think I told. Johnny told me, John, Jim said, sounding irritated. Johnny, yes, demons are real. They do possess people, and the church doesn't always notice quick enough. Tell your sister to keep holy water on her at all times and to draw a line of rock salt across all thresholds. I gave her holy water. Is that it? John Winchester spoke loudly at the same time as Jim started to respond, obliterating the sense of both voices. I didn't get that, Jim, Johnny said. That's the easiest passive protection you can get. There's more that can be done. But I can't show you over the phone. I'd have to come out. All she needs is passive protection, John said in the background. Tell him his sister. I'm not a translator, John. There were some strange noises on the phone, and then the voice speaking directly to him changed. This is John Winchester. Father John Hanadarko, Johnny said. Grace's older brother. Tell Princess Littlefeather to keep her butt out of this mess. She'll be safer, you'll be happier, and I won't have to worry about her. Johnny ignored the foolish name. Grace had been playing that game for years, now. My sister's not very good at staying out of things, Johnny observed. I can't be responsible for keeping her safe if she insists on getting involved, the other man said irritably. And if she draws the attention of demons down on her, it could endanger you, her friend Retta, and any other members of your family there might be. I'll tell her, but she's a cop, so. Exactly, she's a cop. She isn't equipped to handle demons, and she's got her own very important job to do. Someone's got to deal with purely human problems. Okay, I'll tell her. I don't know if she'll listen. Make her listen. You're a priest, you should have some authority. Have you met my sister? John could well imagine trying to assert authority over a sister like Grace Hanadarko. How the hell did I get in the middle of this? He demanded. Look, Father, I've got enough problems with my own family. I can't fix yours. He hit the end button and tossed the phone into Jim's lap before starting the truck up again and pulling back out onto the road. Did you just hang up on him? Jim asked. Yeah, why, do you go to hell for hanging up on a priest? Well, he is a Catholic priest, John. My opinion on that subject might be suspect. John rolled his eyes. Where was I? The angel was about to smite Grace, I believe, Jim said without a trace of humor in his tone, but John just bet he was laughing inside. Do you ever get the feeling that someone's messing with us? All the time. Johnny walked into name of bar and saw Grace downing a beer. He walked up next to her and nodded towards the bartender. Accepting his own beer, he swallowed a good portion of it before speaking. I spoke to my friend. Did you guys have a nice conversation? Grace asked. It was interesting. Johnny swallowed another third of his beer. He was in a car with John Winchester. Her eyebrows rose and she leaned back. No shit. Johnny took in a breath, let it out slowly and said, no shit. Why would he have been with John? Apparently, they've been friends for years, and he's known the boys since they were little. I'd guess he came to see Dean. What did he say? Well, among other things, they said, between them, that Castiel had confirmed that you have an angel of your own. Well, I do, and why does it take a total stranger telling you for you to believe it and not me? Reverend Jim Murphy is not a total stranger, Grace, Johnny said. And you've told me enough whoppers since you were old enough to talk that I think I can be excused for doubting your honesty. Grace scowled at him. That's just not fair. Life is supposed to be righteous, not fair, Johnny said. Can't it be both? Grace asked. You're not 10, Johnny retorted. Can we move on? So, did they tell you how I can help? Actually, John told me that you need to do your job because someone's got to deal with, how did he put it, purely human problems. I didn't say I was going to quit doing my job, Grace protested. He says you're not equipped. That's why I wanted to find out what to do, so I would be equipped. I don't know what to tell you, Grace. All they gave me was passive protections. Damn it. And Earl won't help me, he told me stay away from all of this. Your angel told you to stay away from this, and you didn't. I'm not real good at following orders, Grace said. I thought you knew that. Oh yeah, I know it, Johnny said. Maybe that's part of the point, you have to learn how to follow orders. Well, then I'm going to hell. That's not funny, Grace, Johnny said in a throttled voice. If demons and angels are both real, then so is hell. No kidding, his sister replied. But I'm still me. I'm still the girl who has to ask why and argue before I do what you tell me, if I even do it then. That's not going to change. Aren't you supposed to be at work? I took a couple of personal days, Grace said carelessly, and Johnny stared at her in surprise. Grace never took time off. Kate really wanted me to, and I couldn't come up with a good reason not to, so here I am. She raised her beer in a toast. What are you going to do? I thought I'd drink for a while. Grace, that's not any kind of solution. Nope, but it passes the time. John pulled his truck up in front of the house he and Mary had lived in with their boys so many years before and cut the engine. It felt weird to park out here on the street. He'd always parked up beside the house before, but there was a station wagon parked there now. A pink bicycle lay on its side on the lawn. Mute evidence that a little girl lived here. He pulled the keys out of the ignition and pocketed them. Jim looked over at him. This is it, and it doesn't look much different. Different color, trees been trimmed. But not much else. After another moment of immobility, Jim leaned over and squeezed his shoulder. Come on, John, waiting isn't going to make it any easier. John nodded and opened the door of the truck. He and Jim headed up to the front door of the house where John, after a moment of steeling himself, knocked. They heard footsteps on the other side of the door, then T opened to reveal a woman of about 30. She had long blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, and she was dressed very casually. Hi, she said, can I help you? John and Jim had discussed their best approach, and they'd come to the conclusion that as much of the simple truth as possible was the order of the day. Hello, my name is John Winchester, and this is Reverend Jim Murphy. Her eyes widened, and then she smiled. You used to live here, didn't you? She said. I did, John replied, very startled. How did you? He shook his head in confusion. He wouldn't have thought anyone who remembered him around here would have told her anything that would lead her to welcome him like this. I found some things of yours in the basement, she said. A box of photos. She glanced back and forth between them, then stepped back and held the door wide. I'm Jenny. Come on in. John glanced at Jim and they walked inside. She shut the door behind them, then walked past and led them into the kitchen. As they approached the room, they could hear a very young voice calling the word, juice, over and over again. When John emerged into the kitchen, it felt very strange. Nothing was the same, but everything was the same. The appliances were all different, but they were in the same places. The table was a different shade of wood, the chairs were a different style, but they all stood where their family table had so many years ago. Jenny had sped up a bit and walked over to the fridge. John looked around. Off to their left there was a playpen in which a toddler bounced up and down demanding juice. He couldn't be much more than 2, and he reminded John breathtakingly of Dean at that age. At the table, a girl of about 7 or 8 sat doing homework, her brown hair tied back from her face. She looked up at them curiously. That's Richie, Jenny said, grabbing a sippy cup out of the fridge and hurrying over to hand it to her son. Walking back towards the table, she said, Sari, Th. Is John Winchester and Reverend Murphy. Hello, Sari, John said with a smile at the child. She looked very serious. Smoothing her daughter's hair, Jenny said, Mr. Winchester used to live here. Sari's eyes darted to his face again, then back down to her math book. John sensed some tension in her, but he didn't know the source. It was all too easy to make assumptions, but likely as not, he was simply alarmed by there being strangers in the house. You've just moved in, have you? Jim asked. Yes, from Wichita. Do you have family in town? No, she said, and she paused for a longish moment. I just needed a new start. New town, new job. She shrugged. When I find one, I can understand that, John said. He glanced around the room, attempting to simulate a fondness where all he felt was a sense of wrongness. How do you like the old place? She grimaced. Well, I don't want to badmouth your old home, but this house has a few issues. It always had a few issues, John replied with a chuckle. That made her smile. He glanced around the familiar, yet unfamiliar room, then back at her face. What have you noticed? Shrugging, she glanced up at the ceiling. As John recalled, Sammy's nursery was right above this room. That gave him a bit of a quiver, which he ruthlessly repressed. Oh, it's just an old house. The wiring is a little outdated, I think. We have flickers on an hourly basis. John didn't glance at Jim because he didn't want to telegraph his reaction to that news to her, but it didn't sound good. The sink's blocked up for no reason I can determine. Joe, HN had a sudden flash of strangely doubled perception. He could see and hear Mary making that same complaint, and he remembered all the insanity they'd gone through to try and figure it out. Shaking his head to clear it, he realized gratefully that his recollection hadn't taken any time at all. Jim had probably noticed, but Jenny hadn't. He essayed a smile at her. Back in my day, there was a tree root that broke into the pipe under the house, John said. If I were you, that's where I'd start. The man who sold me the place told me it was a perpetual problem, but the tree causing the problem is on the next property. So we couldn't do anything about it. I'd been planning to put in a little retaining wall to block it, but, he shrugged, looking away. That memory had ambushed him out of nowhere. But what? Jenny asked in all innocence. John bit his lip and turned away. He heard Jim cross the room to her and speak quietly. A tug on the sleeve of his jacket made him look down into the face of the little girl. There's something in my closet, she said. What? He asked. There's something in my closet. Was it here when you lived here? No, John replied, squatting down in front of her. What's in your closet? Oh, sweetie, Jenny said with compassion. She came over and put her hand on Sari's shoulder. There's nothing in your closet. Giving her daughter a reassuring stroke down her back, she added. She had a nightmare the other night. I wasn't dreaming, Sari protested soberly. It came into my bedroom. And it was on fire. John felt as if his heart was going to stop beating. On fire. Jim handled things from there. He dimly heard his friend explaining that John's wife had died in a fire in the house, and Jenny exclaimed anxiously over him. Before he knew it, they were back in the truck with Jim driving them to a motel. John remained quiet until they got a room and went inside. Then he cleared his throat. Sammy mentioned fire, but it sounded general, not quite this specific. Would you have expected him to? Jim asked. His dreams and visions about Dean were detailed and specific. This seems very fragmentary. Why so little? Well, it does have some of the classic signs of a haunting. The flickers? John asked. Yes, and she mentioned hearing scratching in the walls. We should go see Missouri, John said. She might have some insight. And hold find out if anything else has happened in that house since you and the boys left it. John nodded and they headed out. Blank. Sam was fixing lunch when Dean emerged from the bedroom with a pillow. He put it up against the half wall that separated the living area from the driver's section and slumped down on the sofa, facing where Sam was working. So, Sammy, what numbers should I choose for the lotto? What? You said you were psychic, Sammy. What numbers will win me $1 million? I don't know, Sam said, shaking his head. It doesn't work that way. I don't see stuff on purpose. It just happens. What good is it, then? Sam shrugged. It helped us find you. Dean looked away uneasily. Then he looked back, grinning faintly. To be honest, the angel found me first. His grin died. Or that was kind of my fault. What was your fault? Sam asked, not sure what Dean meant. I kind of helped the demon summon him, Dean replied, looking down at his hands. How'd that happen? He told me what I was doing would only hurt me, not anyone else, and I, stupidly, believed him. Did he hurt Saz? Dean blinked at his insane brother. He trapped him there, he said slowly, enunciating the words carefully, but did he do anything else to him? He tried, Dean said, distinctly unsettled. And I think it was weird. It was after I went inside the circle. Castiel stiffened like he was scared or something. What could a demon do to an angel? Sam asked. I don't know, Dean said. But it was some kind of spell, Latin, but I didn't understand it. Do you remember any of the words? I think, invoco, and, abort terror, and I think the word for angel was in there somewhere. Abort terror, Sam repeated. It sounded like that, Dean said. Don't be a dick. I should remind you that I was in pain, freezing cold, and probably bleeding out. Sam's expression went anxious and pathetic. Don't, Dean growled. Sorry, Dean, Sam blurted, coming over to sit next to him on the sofa. I said, don't, damn it. Dean said, shoving at his brother. I'm fine. I'm not dying now. But, Dean, Dean gave Sammy an almighty shove and knocked him onto the floor. Quit it. Stop trying to make me feel like I should feel bad. Sam stared at him from the floor, his lips pursing in that pissy way that always got Dean's back up. Then he shook his head, his face relaxing. 1 minute you're mad because I'm being too judgy, the next because I'm too goopy. I don't know what the middle ground should be. There are other emotions in the world besides judgy and goopy. Dean pointed out irritably. Sam rolled his eyes. Not ones you'll let me show, he retorted. You're just dumb, and that's a sad thing to say about a guy who graduated Stanford. I mean, how would you react if I told you I loved you? Not goopy, just straightforward fact. Dean blinked in shock at his brother, the brother who'd hated him for the last 5 or 6 years. I love you. He paused. How would you react? Dean felt his eyes heat up and knew he was going to cry. You know, Sammy, he said, desperately controlling a desire to sniff. I haven't eaten in a long time. I didn't have much at breakfast. Oh, right. Sam scrambled to his feet, the emotional moment forgotten in his worry over Dean's diet. I was just fixing lunch. I thought we'd have hamburgers. Sounds good. While Sam got back to work, Dean struggled to keep from crying in front of him. That would send him goopy for sure. After a few minutes, when it became clear he wasn't going to prevent it, he got up and turned towards the door. I need some air. Sam turned. You sure? Yeah, Sammy. Well, make sure and wear your coat. I'll come check on you if you take too long. Thanks, Mama Sam, Dean said as he opened the door and went down the steps. There were a few seats around, but Dean didn't want to settle. He'd get too cold too quick. Tears welled up and started to fall. He'd given up on Sammy. And he'd kind of assumed that this whole reaction was a combination of guilt and responsibility. He would never have expected Sammy to say that, and mean it, no matter what happened. His baby brother had never been able to lie for shit. He needed to get this under control so he could go back inside. He hadn't put on the thermal pants under his jeans, so he was rapidly chilling. Joe's voice came from behind him. The wrong direction since he was facing the roadhouse. Hey Dean, she said. What are you doing out here? He looked down to hide his face. I just needed some air, he said, his voice a bit husky. You sound like you need to go back inside, Joe said. I will soon. Dean, you sound hoarse. I really think you. Exasperated, Dean looked up and glared at her. I'm fine. Her eyes widened as she got a look at his face. Dean, are you okay? What did I just say? He demanded. She shook her head. Dean, you're crying. Cold wind. Watering, not crying. There's no wind, Joe said matter-of-factly. Not now, Dean replied. There hasn't been any all day. There was a bit before you showed up. Dean, I've been outside a while, she said, laughing. It's not windy. Look, it was a freak thing. Dean growled. Let it go. Dean, if you need to talk, I can. Get off my back, he growled. What are you out here for, anyway? I came out to get some boxes out of the shed. She gestured, and Dean glanced over where she was indicating. Where are the boxes? He asked, looking at her unburdened state. There's something in the way, and I don't really want to move it. I was just going to get my mom to help me get them over. Don't bother your mom, I got this, she protested, but Dean guided her back to the shed. Where are these boxes? The thing she didn't want to move was an old motorcycle. She climbed over it and looked at him worriedly. You take them from me and put them down. You're not carrying them any distance. I can carry. If you make like you're going to carry anything, I'll go tell Sam. Cheater. Whatever. I mean it. He shrugged and she turned to pick up a box. When she passed it over the back of the bike, Dean expected something heavy, but it weighed nothing at all. Hey, what's in this? He asked. Tree stuff, Joe said. Dean looked down at the box and grinned. Cool. He wondered suddenly what his dad had done with all their Christmas ornaments. He had vague memories of a glorious silver star, and being permitted to hang it on the tree under his mother's close supervision. He put the box down and turned towards Joe for another. They moved 4 fairly lightweight boxes this way, and then Joe climbed back over the motorcycle. Whose bike is that? Dean asked. Claude Jackson, she said, and he blinked at her. He's a hunter who went off from here with some other guys and never came back. We didn't know what to do with it, but if we'd left it out in the weather it would have been destroyed, so we rolled it in here. That was back in the summer. What were they hunting? I'm not sure, and none of them did come back. She shrugged, but Dean didn't think it was lack of concern, more like it was something that happened too often for her to expend a lot of energy on. She picked up a box and started across the yard. Dean picked up the next box down and followed her. We get stuff like that sometimes, Joe continued. And Dean put on a bit of speed to catch up to her. Guys ask us to hold on to something for them and then never come back. She shrugged and turned towards him. Just usually, her eyes widened and she came to a dead stop. You aren't supposed to be carrying anything. It's fine, Joe, Dean said, not stopping. You coming? Your brother's going to skin me alive. Your father? She seemed struck dumb by the thought of Dean's dad. Dean, you put that down right now, she ordered. Here in the snow? He asked lightly, not turning. I don't think so. Come on, Joe, your mom's waiting. Dean Winchester, I have half a mind to go straight to that motor home and tell Sam on you. If you want to carry that thing twice as far, that's up to you. It's not like it weighs anything, Joe retorted. My own argument, made for me. Dean said with a grin. Man, am I good. Joe, the voice came from the back door to the kitchen. You find those boxes yet? Coming, Mom. Joe yelled back. In a quieter voice, she added. She'll set you straight. Dean wondered if she would. Ellen had struck him thus far as a very practical woman with a deep understanding of people. They went around the corner and into Ellen's view. Well, I see you drafted help. Actually, I volunteered against strong objections, Dean replied with a grin. But it's not like it weighs anything. He hefted it lightly. See, Hey, Ellen exclaimed. Be careful, those are my tree ornaments. Chastened, Dean pulled the box in closer to his chest and followed her into the house, Joe behind him. Bobby was setting up the tree in the living room upstairs with Lucy supervising. Well, is it straight? Bobby asked the dog sarcastically. Lucy tilted her head contemplatively, then gave one short, and Dean would swear, affirmative bark. Bobby rolled his eyes and tightened something, then stepped back. Thanks, dog, he said gruffly. Lucy gave a happy little yip, then trotted up to Dean's side to nuzzle his hand. He'd put the box down where Ellen had directed him to, so his hands were free to caress his dog's face and head. I wondered where you'd run off to, he murmured to her. She couldn't let Bobby do this alone, you know, Ellen said. He might get it wrong. Good girl, Dean said. Keep Bobby on the straight and narrow. Bobby gave him a mock glower, then said, how many more boxes are there? 2, Joe said. I'll come help you with them then. I can do it, Dean protested. Where's your brother, anyway? Bobby asked. Dean felt a stab of entirely stupid panic. In the RV, making lunch, he said. I'd better go. He took off out of the upstairs apartment and hurried down the stairs. Lucy accompanied him, and he got outside just in time to see Sam exiting the RV in search of him. Dean, where were you? Sam demanded. He helped me carry Christmas boxes inside, Joe announced behind him. You did what? Dean let his baby brother lead him inside, lecturing all the way. It beat the other thing hands down. It didn't make Dean want to cry. It made him want to laugh. The door opened, and before he could even see who was on the other side, she began to speak. John Winchester, exclaimed a familiar voice in a faintly southern drawl. John couldn't help smiling. She had such a sweet voice. Why didn't you call and tell me that you'd found Dean? It sharpened up nicely when she got irritated, though. I'm sorry, Missouri. I didn't call anyone. Jim, here, only found out yesterday. He glanced at Jim for verification. And I found out from the news, Jim put in. Me too, Missouri replied. The only reason I didn't call was that I was fairly sure that John was busy. Well, I wasn't so considerate, Jim said, giving John a dark glance. What brings you back to Lawrence, John? Missouri asked. I'd have thought you'd want to stay with Dean and Sam. A hunt, John said. At our old house. Have you sensed anything there? Her brows wrinkled. No, and I've kept track of the old place, Missouri replied. What have you seen? John flushed. Nothing, actually, it's Sam, Missouri asked, her brow furrowing in concern. What a terrible burden for him to bear. John tried to maintain his cool in the face of this. But Missouri put a hand on his shoulder, undoing him a little. There's a family living there now, Jim said. I'm Reverend Jim Murphy, by the way. Pleasure to meet you, Reverend, Missouri said. Likewise, Miss Mosley, Jim replied. This family, they bear a significant resemblance to John's. She's a widow with 2 children, one 7, one 2, and... She's a widow, John interjected. Didn't I tell you? Jim asked. There are some of the signs of a classic haunting, as well, and the 7-year-old, a little girl, says there's something in her closet. Something on fire, John added. God, please tell me Mary hasn't somehow become an angry spirit. I don't believe she has, Missouri said. No, indeed, Jim seconded. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. I wish I could be as sure. So many of the ghosts he'd laid to rest had been good, decent people in life, but had turned dark and dangerous after years of haunting. I think we should check with the real estate agent who sold her the house. Jim said. He didn't tell her about Mary or the fire, so who knows what else he might be concealing. John nodded unhappily. That's a good notion, he said. And I should call Sammy and see if he's got anything else for us. Wouldn't he have called you? Jim asked. He also wants to check on Dean, Missouri observed as John left the room. Outside on the porch, he called his younger son's cell phone. Dad, did anything happen? Sam asked instantly upon picking up. Nothing's happened yet. I've met the family living there now, Jenny, Sari, 7, and Richie, 2. Wow, does that give you anything? As Jenny of middle height, blonde, with dark eyes. John felt a faint chill come over him. Yes, she's the woman I saw in my dream, then, Sam replied. I saw her at the upstairs window, pounding for help. She looked really frightened. John grimaced, not liking that image. If you come up with any more details, call. I will. How'd your brother take the news? Sammy snorted. He freaked out, took a nap, then asked for the lotto numbers. John snorted. That sounds like Dean. Right now, he and Lucy are helping Joe and Ellen decorate the Christmas tree. That was a charming image, though how a dog helped decorate a tree was beyond him. Sam went on with mild resignation, I was only required to put the star on top. What's Bobby doing? Perfecting Ellen's eggnog recipe. Evidently he has his own ideas about what's required. He always does. John sighed. Another moment he was missing. Remember, son. What? Sam asked, sounding suspicious. I love you. John hit end on his phone and started wiping his eyes. Blank, underscore, blank. Sam stared at his suddenly dead phone in astonishment. Dumbfounded, he walked away from the living room where Christmas carols were playing and into the kitchen where Bobby was at work. He looked up with a grin, but his face fell at Sam's expression. What's wrong, boy? Dad just told me that he loves me. That a bad thing? Bobby asked. He's never said it before, Sam said. I don't know what it means. Probably what he says. But why did he say it? Why now? What for? Bobby gave him a sour look. Dean's wrong. Sam blinked at him, puzzled by the sudden turn of subject. About what? You're not a girl. A girl wouldn't question that. Sam rolled his eyes. Bobby, I'm serious. Do you think he might think he's in serious danger, that he wants to say it now, before he can't? Sam, are you telling me that your daddy never once said he loved you? Sam shrugged. Not since we were little. Or at any rate, not since we were kids. For absolutely certain, not since I was like 15. Most fathers don't talk about that much, Sam. What, did your father not tell you he loved you? Nope, Bobby said, his expression going even darker. Love was not something he ever talked about, not with me and not with my mom. Sam grimaced. Sorry, I didn't mean to call up bad memories. Not your fault, kid. I've been having bad memories pop up periodically since your daddy mentioned Max Miller. Sam blinked at him slowly, putting things together in a way that made an ugly picture. Bobby, were you abused? Quote. Bobby turned his back on Sam abruptly and picked up the pitcher he'd been working over. You want some eggnog? Sam opened his mouth to ask the question again but then closed it. Bobby wasn't going to answer. He shrugged and followed his surrogate uncle up the stairs and into the living room. Dean looked up when they came into the room. Sam hoped his face didn't give away his confusion over what Bobby had said, but Dean's eyes sharpened on him. What's wrong? How's Dad? What's going on? Has something happened? He's fine, Sam said, trying to appear calm. Nothing's happened yet. Then why are you upset? Dean demanded, but Sam didn't have anything prepared to cover the question so he just gaped at his brother. So, he's not okay, and you're lying about it. I'm not lying, Dean. Sam protested, aware that all the eyes in the room were on him now. Dad's fine. He just he's in Lawrence. Dude, I can see that upsetting him, but I can't see it upsetting you. What's wrong? Or do I have to call Dad myself? Nothing's wrong with Dad, Dean, Sam said, but the specificity was his downfall. Nothing's wrong with Dad, Dean repeated. So is Pastor Jim all right? Dad and Pastor Jim are still investigating, Dean. Like I said, nothing's happened yet. So what's got you so upset, then? I'm not upset, Sam retorted. When you came in here, you looked like one of your foundation stones was rocking, and you don't look much better now. Sam grimaced, turning away, running his hand through his hair. So what the hell has you so freaked out? Sam shook his head. Ask Bobby, he said finally. What? Bobby asked, giving him a startled look. He didn't answer my question, maybe he'll answer it if you ask. What question? Dean asked, sounding utterly confused. Do you really think now is the time? Bobby asked. It's a little late to back off from it now, Sam growled. If you'd just answered my question downstairs, we might haven't you been through this and passed it by now, and Dean wouldn't have noticed anything, but you had to ignore the question and leave me hanging. Sam, and I can't hide shit from Dean. Sam shook his head helplessly. Never could. You're hiding it pretty well at the moment, Dean announced. I know something's up, but I still don't know what. Bobby implied his father abused him, but he didn't answer when I asked directly. Dean stared at Sam for a second, then looked at Bobby. Is it true? Bobby shrugged. Is it true? Dean asked again, his brows furrowing with anxiety. Son of a yes, it's true, for all the good it does now. My daddy was a bastard until I was about 12. And then, Bobby shrugged, and then he took off, and I never missed him. With a snort, he added, hell, nobody much missed him. You don't have to be such a hard ass, Bobby, Dean said. It's okay if you missed him. Bobby shook his head. I'm not being a hard ass, Dean. He slumped into a chair and took a deep swallow of eggnog. Is it okay if I didn't miss him? He asked, and Sam put a hand on Dean's shoulder because he looked upset by that. Bobby leaned forward and looked into Dean's eyes. Seriously, kid, there wasn't much to miss. He inched forward in the chair and put his hands on Dean's knees. I know this is kind of a touchy subject, we've never talked about it. The reason I never tried any RDER to take you boys away from your daddy was that I knew how bad it could really be. Sam blinked at them both, not sure what Bobby was talking about. He glanced at Ellen, who looked equally lost. Joe had sunk down onto an ottoman, staring in silent shock. Our dad loves us, Dean said, his voice quiet, but Sam had rarely heard him sound so intense. I know, boy, I know. I've made mistakes, and OD knows I regret that one in particular. What are you talking about? Sam asked. When did you ever try to take us away? Bobby's head came up and he looked a bit taken aback. He looked askance at Dean. Dean shrugged. He was 8, Bobby. I never told him. All he knows is that you and Dad had a fight, and that wasn't exactly news. Dad fought with everybody at one time or another. Okay, fellas, what are you talking about? Ellen asked. After several moments of uncomfortable silence, Bobby said, I think this needs a bit more brandy. Rising, he left the room. Ellen watched him out of sight, then, after a moment, cleared her throat. Dean, you want to share? Not really. Dean took in a deep breath and then sighed. When I was 12, Dad left us at Bobby's when he went on a hunt that was supposed to last 3 days or so. He didn't come back for almost a month. Sam nodded, glancing towards the door where Bobby had gone. I remember that, but what does that have to do with Bobby taking us away? Bobby tried to convince me that Dad was dead, that he wasn't coming back. I wanted us to go look for him, but Bobby wouldn't agree, and he looked away. He finally said we'd be better off if Dad didn't come back. He said that? Sam asked, eyes wide with astonishment. Dean nodded. I got pissed. I took off to go find Dad, and he was on his way back. He picked me up while I was hitchhiking. And he and Bobby had the biggest fight I ever saw. He grabbed you and me and we left. He shrugged. I went back years later, without Dad, but we've never talked about it. He stood up. Not till just now. When Sam got up, he shook his head and pressed him back down. I need to go talk to him, Sammy. Alone. He walked out of the room, muttering, this is going to be awkward enough without an audience. Lucy followed close on his heels. Sam glanced back and forth between Ellen and Joe, then sank into a chair. Well, that was interesting. Blank. When John got back inside Missouri's house, he found that she and Jim had decided between them that they were going back to get Missouri a look around. He gave them an incredulous look. She'll think we're crazy. Me coming by, bringing a friend, that makes sense. Stopping back by with another friend will just look weird. Come on, John, we're going, Missouri said, picking up her handbag and walking out the door. John followed helplessly, wondering exactly where she planned to ride. 3 abreast in his truck was a little awkward, especially when one of the 3 was not Slim. They crammed in and John drove back to the house, hoping devoutly that Jenny wouldn't decide that they were stalking her in some fashion. They reached the front door, and it opened from inside, revealing a frantic Jenny. Did you see Richie? She asked anxiously. No, John said, his heart rate picking up. Can we help you look? Sure, she said, backing up. Where was he when you left him? Jim asked. In the kitchen, just where you saw him earlier, Jenny said, her voice shrill with panic. She turned and ran upstairs. John hurried into the kitchen where he saw that one of the walls of the playpen had come down completely flat to the floor. Jim walked over that way and explored the house going in that direction. John scanned the kitchen and saw milk dripping out of the closed door of the refrigerator. He walked over and saw that the safety latch had been closed, which was probably why Jenny hadn't checked there. He slipped the latch and opened the door to find Richie sitting on the floor of the fridge. There were no shelves, which left him plenty of room. John bent and scooped him out. I found him, he announced, and heard the message passed on. A moment later, Jenny came running in and pulled her son out of John's arms. The rest of them stood around awkwardly while Jenny cooed over her child, but eventually she seemed to notice that not only had Jim and John come back, but they'd brought a stranger with them. What are you all doing here? She asked, giving them wide-eyed, alarmed stares. Where did you find him? He was in the fridge, John replied. But the safety latch, I keep it. He was inside with the safety latch on. Her eyes widened still further. I would never do something like that. She exclaimed. What's going on? That's why we're here, Missouri said in a soft, reassuring voice. We came to warn you that there's a malevolent spirit inhabiting this house. A what? Jenny exclaimed. What are you talking about? Let's all sit down, Missouri said. My name is Missouri Mosley. And I've come to help John and Rev Murphy figure out what's causing all the trouble here. What trouble? Jenny asked, but the way her voice broke suggested to John that he knew exactly what trouble they were referring to. The scratching sounds in the walls, the way the lights flicker, and incidents like this one. She nodded towards the fridge. Or are you going to tea? Tell me that nothing else has happened that you can't explain. Jenny shook her head. What about the thing in Sari's closet? I need to take a look around, Missouri said. I haven't been inside this house for over 20 years. Please stay down here with your son. Where is your daughter? Playing with the little girl down the street. I expect her back any time now. Keep her down here, too, if she gets back before we're done. Missouri glanced at John and Jim, gathering them to her. Both he and Jim followed Missouri up to the second floor. Dean found Bobby in the bar, leaning hard on both arms against the counter. He stared at his surrogate uncle, heart jigging in his chest from the effort of running downstairs. Finally, he grimaced. I didn't know that still bugged you so much, he said. Bobby snorted without turning around. I drove a 12-year-old boy to run away from me, Dean. Anything could have happened to you. If your father hadn't turned up at that moment, God knows what. Bobby trailed off, shaking his head. Abruptly, he flipped around and gazed urgently at Dean. Damn it, kid, I just wanted to keep you two so bad. I wanted to give you boys a steady foundation, but John wouldn't leave you with me. Lucy walked up and butted Bobby's knee. He absently bent to caress an ear. And then I screwed it up completely. I wasn't sure what to expect when you showed back up. But I was mortally glad you weren't there to shoot me. Dean shrugged. When I got older, I kind of understood why you reacted the way you did. Like a moron, you mean? Bobby shook his head grimly. I alienated you completely, taking away one of your safe havens. It was a terrible thing to do to you. It doesn't matter now, Bobby, Dean said. I got past it a long time ago. He moistened his lips and walked over to lean against the bar. How bad was it, Bobby? Your dad? Bobby shrugged. It was bad, he said. My dad wasn't like that, Dean said. I know. Bobby sighed and glanced over at him. I was glad you called me over that thing in Sioux City. I could tell you were still mad at me then, but you did call. Dean sagged onto the bar stool, remembering those anxious hours of hoping that Dad would get back in time. You were close, I knew you'd help, and Dad wasn't coming. I had to get out of that group home, and Sammy needed a grown-up who could look after him in the hospital. Right. Bobby was silent for a while, stroking Luce's head. It's all water under the bridge, Bobby, Dean said. You've been there for me over the years, and you're part of the family. Bobby rolled his eyes. Much more of this and we're both going to start growing lady parts. Okay, then, Dean said. Just promise me you won't tell Sam we did the caring and sharing thing. What do you take me for? Bobby demanded, humorously irate. I wouldn't want to encourage the trend, Dean said. He turned away, then looked back over his shoulder. You coming back upstairs, or are you staying down here to brood? Gimme a couple of minutes, Bobby said, giving Lucy a final pat and standing up again. Okay, but if it's too long, I'll send Sammy down. Is that a threat? Bobby asked with a quizzical look. You really want 6'4" of earnest anxiety gazing at you? Bobby's eyes narrowed. That's dirty pool, boy. Yup. Blank, underscore, blank. The tree was decorated, the 6 of them, including the dog, sat around the living room in various states of sleepiness, and Sam was just contemplating getting Dean down to bed when his phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, he said, Yeah, Dad, how's it going? We're done, John said, his voice a little crackly over the connection. I got a friend here in Lawrence to help, and she says the place is clear, now. Sam had been aware of his feelings about the job Dad had been doing all day, in the back of his mind. He shook his head. It's not done, Dad, he said, sitting up straighter. It doesn't feel done. Sammy, I got a psychic to look into things for me. She says the presence is gone, and I can tell you, it didn't go quietly. No one's hurt, but we had some scares. Dad, have you left town yet? No, but, humor me, stay on watch outside the house tonight. I swear, there's still something coming. His father didn't speak for several long seconds, then he sighed. Okay, Sam, I'll humor you. We'll stay. Good. Be careful, okay, Dad? Of course. Sam, is your brother in bed yet? I was about to take him back out to the RV right now. Let me talk to him. Blinking, Sam refocused his attention from the phone call to the room around him and found everyone staring at him intently. Lucy patted up and nuzzled his hand. Dean, Dad wants to talk to you. Dean leaned forward and snagged the phone. Bobby caught Sam's eye. What was that about? Just the job Dad's working, Sam said. You don't feel like it's done? Joe asked, giving him a puzzled look. It's hard to explain, Sam said. Anyway, I need to put my big brother to bed. Good night, all. He whistled for Lucy, then collared Dean and dragged him out, still talking to Dad. Blank, underscore, blank. Jim hadn't complained at all when John had explained that Sam wanted them to keep watch. He'd just raised his eyebrows and settled in for the night. This whole situation was bizarre. Sam's visions, a poltergeist in their old house. Brought there by the wounds left by Azazel's attack, another entity, and Sam was sure it wasn't over. John sighed and looked back up at the house. Jenny was at the window of the master bedroom, pounding. Her face twisted in a rictus of fear, an exact mirror of the scene Sam had described. Jim, John yelled, and he flung himself out of the truck and raced towards the house. You get the kids, Jim said breathlessly. I'll get Jenny. John didn't respond, but he followed that plan, diving into Richie's room to pull him out of bed, sleepy and confused. He ran down the hall to what had been Sammy's room and heard a voice inside. Are you John's wife? Sari asked. John's heart skipped a beat, but he flung the door open and hurried to Sari's bed. Come on, honey, he said. We need to get you outside. Sari let him lift her up, and he tried not to see or feel the pillar of fire that stood at the foot of the bed. Turning in the opposite direction, he carried both children down the stairs. Halfway down, he felt something near his ankles, something reaching for him. He got down to the base of the steps, put the children down and fixed Sari's hand around her brother's. Sari, take your brother outside as fast as you can and don't look back. He ordered. She obeyed, but before John could take a step towards the door, something seized him around the ankles and dragged him backwards. He heard the screams of the children, but then the front door slammed shut, cutting off most of the sound. His feet hit an obstruction, and his entire body was forced upwards, flat against the wall behind him. Something was putting intense pressure all along his frame, squeezing him, crushing him. He heard crashing from the front of the house, but he was sure it was too late for him. Then, out of nowhere, that towering figure of flame rose up from the floor and started towards them, him and the poltergeist set on killing him. She stopped about 5 feet away and a face came clear in the fire. John stared in mute astonishment. Blank, underscore, blank. Jim managed to crash into the house and ran into the front room where he found John apparently pinned to the wall. A pillar of fire menaced him from a couple of paces away. Jim ran closer and aimed his shotgun at the flame column. No, John yelled desperately. No, she's not a threat. Abruptly, the flames vanished, leaving a woman standing there in a white nightdress and robe. Her long blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, and he recognized the face from John's photos. Mary Winchester. She walked towards John, and Jim moved so that he could see her more clearly. There was nothing threatening in her expression. Her eyes were warm with love and compassion. John, I'm sorry. Tell the boys I love them. Mary, John breathed, a lifetime of lost love in his voice. She smiled briefly, then took a step back. Addressing herself to the house in general, she said, You, get out of my house. And let go of my husband. Flames erupted around her again, obliterating the image of the woman. John's expression went anguished as the flames reached the ceiling and flashed out against the surface, leaving no signs behind. The force holding John to the wall released suddenly, and John fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands. Jim hurried to his side. John, are you hurt? Brown eyes looked up at him, wet with tears. She's gone again. There wasn't much more to be gotten out of him, so Jim got him back out to the truck and into the passenger seat, then returned to answer Jenny's questions. He tried to keep an eye on John while he wrapped things up. He called Missouri to do another check of the house and checked with Sam to see if he thought the case was over. Sam seemed to think it was good. When everything seemed calm, he turned around and found that John and the truck had disappeared. He tried calling him, but there was no response. The end.